Okay. Was I getting a little too into that song there?
Yes, probably.
Yes. I may have let it run a little bit long. All right. Well, welcome back. Welcome back to the historic third episode.
Yeah, I wasn't sure I was going to make it.
I'm glad you did. Anyone who does not know, which I cannot imagine being the case, but just in case, I would like to introduce R.J. Downard, author of Evolution Slam Dunk and maintainer of the TIP Troubles in Paradise and Methodology of Creationism project. Been a regular on Movie Night Live here on Friday nights. Thank you for joining us again, RJ. It's all you.
Oh, gosh. Well, it's all trying to enjoy all the wonderful world of science that we have nowadays and making sure as many people as possible know about it, because we have no excuse for not having this stuff at our fingertips because it's right out there. We have mouses. We can click. We can internet. It's just amazing.
Oh, okay. We've gotten some negative feedback on the musical selections for the opening of RJ's Evolution Hour. Okay. You know what? Why don't we make a contest of it? We've done
Yeah,
we've done
let's
it
come out.
before.
Anybody out there who wants to pick a tune for the stuff, let it hang out.
Yes, pick a tune, and we will let RJ make the final decision which one he thinks is the most appropriate, and that will be it's one
Come with a
judge.
good kick to it, a little bit of twist. It can be a little funky. There's
It's
all sorts of possibilities that can go on there.
yes, there'll be
Doesn't need to be
one
pop.
judge.
It can be classical, but for the youngsters, they enjoy the rock music there.
Indeed, but yeah, RJ will be the judge, and the decision of the judges, all one of them, is final, and the person who selects the song that RJ selects as the winner will get, what do you think, another Darwin fish? The Darwin fish are pretty cool. That went over well last time. All right, there's the prize. Okay.
We don't need no education. Yeah, that actually isn't a bad idea for that. There's a certain funky irony there, Apologia. Apologia and I have just finished, or at least started finished the start of collaboration on skewering Answers in Genesis in their Answers News. Paul might want to weigh in on that from his end of it. He's working on the video of it, but he tossed at me their June 8th outing with Purdom and Hoge, and I went through and shall we say, offered some trenchant commentary and source material that undermined their credibility on every single point that they brought up.
So you're saying you were thorough this time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was exhausting. It took me like 24 hours to do it.
Well, yeah, you're nothing if not thorough, as far as I can recall.
It's a perfect example of how methodology works, especially if you got a functioning internet. They had 16 links, and you follow them. So you go click, blop, blop. And it turns out about a third of them were actually secondary or tertiary references to what turned out to be actual technical papers, half of which I already knew about because I follow the field. So there was not a big surprise about what some of this material was, and I could guesstimate why they were bringing it up to begin with. The problem is none of them ever bothered to read the original papers, even though it was like mouse click fast to get to. So I was able to comment upon the information they're leaving out. And not once did apparently any of the little gang at AIG ever bother to follow through and read the original papers.
I see. I'm just putting the
None
link
of this
in.
surprised me. I had both. I've never seen live before, along with Hoge. She's a pleasant, affable person, and so is Hoge, for that matter. I'm an annoying old fart, and so don't claim to be personable. But mere personability and pleasantness is no substitute for thinking. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, AIG is pretty much the poster child for intellectually unarmed. Well, I'd say this, they're a poster child for tortuganosity. To think about things they don't want to think about. It's revealing that one of their references were secondary sources, and at no point did they ever bother to check out the primary source. That's pure laziness. I mean, if it were a matter of where they had to climb onto a mountaintop or go visit some ancient monastery somewhere, looking through dusty old tomes with gloves on their hand to avoid contaminating the text, no, this was mouse click. This was super duper fast. Download the PDF, read. And so it wasn't a matter of where they had no ability to prepare. Presumably, this was information that was behind. So they theoretically could have worked just as fast as I did, but they do that.
Doesn't always work out that way. All right, just put the.
Oh, Timbuk3, future's so bright, I gotta wear shades. That sounds like an interesting tune. I'm assuming that's a potential tune cover.
All right,
The audio, so we're scistrike can actually have access to what the thing sounds like because I'll have to hear it. I'll have to have a get together on that to resolve that.
Indeed.
Are you once more shooting with howitzers on nude mole rats? Well, I don't know about the nude part, but the general take-home lesson about methodology is it is a game Tortukans cannot play. It's not that they're just bad at it. They literally cannot play it. They cannot brain in mode to be able to think through. You want to get primary sources. You want to assemble as big a data set as possible. You want to think through what you think happened, and you want to explain the data better than your opponents can. I caught particularly Purdom on a gigantic double standard because she pointedly criticized those criticisms of creationism where they don't read our work to find out what we actually say. And that's a fair cop for some critics of creationism. Some people read P.C. Myers and they think they know what the creationist says because they're copying secondarily. Not my problem. I read lots of creationists directly. The problem is she then went on, not once, not twice, 3, 4 times, upon material where the primary source science data was directly accessible, and she never bothered to do it. So there was flat out double standard. She was refusing to do the thing she was insisting her opponents had to do. The game, and we go to primary sources, and we demand they go to primary sources in this game. Sorry, and they're never going to win it. Makes our side progressively stronger because we're no longer building our argument on what somebody said about something. We're building it on the primary source science data. So we can just swat them down like flies and waiting to find out where it is. You lack the ability, just not the opportunity. You know, you're right. I'm positing that people who can believe things that are not true, a mental block when it comes to that jump. They literally can't tell the difference between a primary and a secondary source. They're looking at source material in terms of whether it reinforces what they want to be true. And anybody can suffer from that affliction. Anybody that you can find atheists that can have that. You can find pro-science people. And that's why troubling aspects of this Tortukan phenomena that I've been, is people who believe things that are true. Tortukans can map onto things that are true just as easily that things that are not true. And so basically we're cutting some slack where, yeah, they're saying something that's true and maybe we have a little quibble with some of their method. No, you got to have everybody judged by the same standard. And that's why, in principle, I can shoot my mouth off on anything, but you should be able to ask me about my sources and how I fact check them. And if I can't defend that, then you have legitimately stumped the RJ and you've legitimately called me out on something. And everybody has to play by the same set of rules. Yes, quite right, Fen. Dr. Georgia Purdom, the resident AIG, geneticist, kind of. She's been published in actual technical literature, not really so much on her own, but collaboratively. Also known as PhD Giggles by Paleogenesis collaborator Morgan. Yeah, she's an affable person. I'd never seen her in person before on the video. She's quite pleasant. She could easily do a guest shot on The Big Bang Theory if she wanted to. She'd be perfectly affable in that respect. But looking at the primary sources, it's not going to work out well on her side. She's in that range of AIG's sciencey crowd. We have to remember that the people who do the fact claiming in the young earth creationists are not the ones that are the top of the food chain public. Is not a fact claimant. He's a secondary redactor. Kent Hovind is not a fact claimant. He's a secondary redactor. He's copying other people's arguments. Purdom is a fact claimant. She actually writes material. So is Elizabeth Mitchell. So is Jeffrey Tompkins. A lot of these people you may or may not be aware of because they're not necessarily the talking heads that pop up in the apologetics, but they do show up at this lower level. They don't do a heck of a lot of public lecturing, although they do a little bit. Jason Lyle trips around on some of that. He's done some material. It's very different over in intelligent design land. Their talking heads are the design movement. The people who are the primary fact claimants for their side, the Michael Behes and the Jonathan Wellses and Steve Myers and all that bunch, they're the ones who are the public face of intelligent design. So it's a bit different when you're dealing with that bunch. Oh, hi, Eat Meal. I will say Eat Meal and Pelagia are wonderful supporters. Eat Meal and also Paul Williams are two of the people who have stepped up on the Patreon site, which is a modality of how we can keep doing this in a land of tough budgets and Trumplandia distaste for science. And I strongly urge, out of both desperation and conviction, for people to trot on over there if they can help there, or at the GoFundMe. There's a shameless plug. See, I'm getting the shameless plugs in even before anything.
That's
We didn't
actually
have,
helpful.
James, do you know about recent reclassifications to Ornithoskeledon? If that is a reference to the reclassification of dinosaurs, where they've decided that the Ornithischian dinosaurs are closer to the theropods than they are to sauropods, yes, indeedly do. There was a brand new paper on that in Nature, which caused a little bit of a stir in the press, although I have to say, not big a yawn to me, anticipating what was going on here, that there was an issue about this little critter called Herrerasaur. The Herrerasaurs are at the very base of the split between the Ornithischian bird-hip dinosaurs and the Saurischian lizard-hip dinosaurs, and they were always kind of uncertain where they played out. Well, turns out when they look at that a little bit more in detail in the new fossils that have emerged, it looks like the Saurischians split off much earlier, along with the Herrerasaurs, and that the theropod Saurischian dinosaurs are actually an independent development that occurred later on, and it's very close to the branch between Ornithischians. So, was that an answer to your question, Brian? That particular taxon, Ornithoskeledon, it's I don't know if that's in the dinosaur bunch or not. If issue, then you've stumped me, because I'm not familiar with that right off the name. Now, sliding up on the screen was the Hovind theory not from him? Earth that blocked out UV light and kept Earth on greenhouse? Actually, no, that goes way back. The ice canopy theory was a guy named Patterson back in the early 60s. In fact, I first heard about that from a creationist physics teacher in my high school who stopped to lecture on the ice canopy theory one day out of the blue. He was a really sweet guy. He was a great teacher, absolutely fabulous teacher. But nevertheless, I realized in retrospect that he was probably a closet creationist, or certainly creationist friendly. And the model of trying to figure out where the water comes from and how they can produce kind of like a hothouse planet before the flood takes place has been one of the persistent problems. I'm trying to catch up on some of the material. Did AIG scientists get the degrees only in order to have one of them to give credibility? Not really. That was true for Jonathan Wells over in Design Land, where the Unification Church actually bankrolled his degrees, one of which I think was at Berkeley. But I think most of the ones who get degrees, Andrew Snelling and Tompkins and others, genuinely feel that they're pursuing science. They certainly want to have that science degree under their belt so that they can hold their own against non-creationists. But make no mistake about it, these people are genuinely wanting to do, air quotes, good science. The problem is that they've got an ideological frame that absolutely straitjackets their conclusions. When you look at it in what they do later on, once they have their degree, that they're spending an awful lot of time not thinking about things they don't want to think about. Ooh, Sai, keep an eye on Pelagia's question about the Miller experiment follow-ons, please. That was a good one and is sunk a bit when you kept answering my small talk instead. I will comment about Miller experiment
Do you want to hear?
because
Do you want to hear what
one
Paul?
of the
Do you want to
quibbles
hear what Paul said first?
on.
Or, or,
Fine. If you need to say shut up, Jim.
oh no, I was just going to ask. Do you want to hear what Paul said first?
Oh yeah, jump in because I'm kind of
Okay.
catching up on
Yeah.
Fino's comment. What did he say?
Yeah, I pulled it up. Pelagia would like to know what advances have been made in abiogenesis beyond the Miller experiment. What should we be pointing to? I think that's the one Fino's talking about.
Happy to answer. First, a preface on the Miller experiment. This was done back in the 50s where they were trying to figure out, could you generate a prebiotic material just by basically taking a primitive atmosphere, adding water, lightning, and seeing what happens. And they were able to generate amino acids that way. It was fairly quickly realized that the methane ammonia atmosphere they were using is probably not the early atmosphere of the Earth. And they very quickly corrected for that over the next few years, and they worked out new experiments, which seemed initially successful. However, all of the little vials, and only a couple of years ago, some of the people found those back down in the vaults, and they now could analyze them with way better equipment than was available 40, 50 years ago. And it turned out they were really good at making prebiotic material. The little gunk that was being generated at the bottom of the vials was in fact way more powerful numbers and quantities of amino acids, but they were unable to detect it with the tools of the 1950s. Now, since 50s, there's a whole bunch of new issues that have arisen. One is the RNA world, where it's been discovered that RNA, unlike DNA, is an autocatalyst, and it can self-replicate in some early forms. And we've also discovered that the core of the ribosome, which is the gizmo that plugs amino acids together to make proteins, that's at the core of all living systems, it's actually an RNA ribozyme molecule, not a protein. Further reinforcement that there is a prebiotic system that isn't using DNA. The DNA is kind of a hitchhiker. The other great development has been the role of hydrothermal vents. In the Darwin era, they were really thinking in terms of the warm little pond that kind of produces stuff on the surface of the Earth. Well, the problem with a lot of prebiotic experiments, and they were the first to realize this, without ozone in the atmosphere that comes from oxygen, that comes from cyanobacteria that produces the oxygen, you have a surface that's really being bathed in ultraviolet light. Not good for molecules and living systems. So the idea is that it's really got to be made underwater, or better yet, way underwater, to be insulated from all that ultraviolet stuff. Well, they've now discovered so much is going on in hydrothermal vents. Maybe they don't need sunlight at all for this process, that you might have prebiotic systems developing chemically in cyanobacteria or methanogens, which make use of gunk that's being thrown out from these hydrothermal vents. And there's been a lot of work on that. Sutherland is one of the big researchers in this area. Sutherland or Sunderland, I'm constantly getting him confused with the creationist. It's one or the other. In papers that have just come out very recently in Nature and other journals, where they found that by adding more ingredients, phosphorus and other things, they're able to generate way more prebiotic material, and very quickly. Things that were extremely difficult to generate in the experiments they were doing for the decades before turn out to be like a snap once you start putting the right ingredients into hydrothermal vents. Now, have we made life in the lab? Nope. We've gone way beyond what we were in the Miller years. We've gone way beyond what we were even 5 or 10 years ago. And the other issue that's relevant is, what was the thing generating? I happen to fall in the camp that some evolutionists do, that metabolism for replication. That you have to have a system that produces basically the raw materials of life, and to be able to do it in a way that's quite reliable without having to have replicating systems. Now, then the development of cellular packaged replicators, that can come next, because if you don't have the metabolism running, the moment the replicator starts up, it's going to eat itself out of house and home. And if you don't have a metabolic cycle already running independently of it, you're going to run out of food for the replicators. The other big issue that's at the cutting edge is, how many amino acids were involved in the early life systems, and how were they encoded? Only DNA, or were they by RNA? Or there's this other branch of nucleic acid that isn't RNA either, that seems to have potential life system quality, that there may have been a bunch of training wheel living systems before you get to the system that we now see as LUCA. Remember that acronym, LUCA, the last universal common ancestor, which would be the thing from which all living life on the earth has been physically descended, and would be a kind of bacteria-ish thing. And there's a whole technical literature trying to figure out what the properties of LUCA were. Argument to be made, the replicating system had only 2 codons rather than 3. Nucleic acids that tell you what amino acid gets encoded for by the replicator. And for this is that there's a certain amount of redundancy in the coding system. You've got 3 codons and they generate 64 combinations, but there's only 20 amino acids that are used. So there's quite a few that have redundant ones. If you peel back the redundancies, it turns out a 2 codon system will generate the amino acids that are the most commonly used in proteins. That you could have an earlier system if you have fewer codons and fewer amino acids involved. Now you have way lower probabilities and error thresholds for how replicator systems run. And there's a whole analysis about the error threshold, how much mutation can you sustain before the system crashes and all of that. Yeah, Luca lived on the 2nd floor. Yeah, in many respects, that's a good analogy. You could say that the basement is the system where you have prebiotic systems that are generating some kind of replicators and some kind of metabolism, but they're not necessarily ones that are going to go anywhere. Then the 1st floor is the actual first successful replicating system. And then the LUCA has developed from a lot of potential natural selection. The moment you have a replicator, and any mutations that occur that improve survivability get filtered through the natural selection sieve. We're talking about non-sexual bacterial systems that can exchange genetic information once you get the ribosome system and a few of these other things going. The other big issue is how DNA filtered in. There's an argument to be made that DNA functioned like a parasite. It's a more reliable parasite. The DNA backbone stays connected together easier than RNA. The other mystery issue, and in fact, I've been studying all of the potential characterizations, we have double-stranded DNA that's used in our genome. And, somebody write down the note, James, do you consider development of the eye to be the probable initiating factor in the Cambrian explosion? Yeah, we want to get back to that. That one's a really good one.
Got it. I'm watching.
Yeah. Can be my note paper because I ramble on. I just want to finish off the bit about the DNA comes in a variety of forms. It can come left-hand twist and right-hand twist, and sometimes both forms occur, although one form is more dominant than the other. You can also have triple helixes where a 3rd line attaches. RNA normally comes in a dual strand as well when they produce the thing that runs through the ribosome, but DNA or RNA, and so there's a whole bunch of extra permutations, and living systems make use of those. So whether those are just oddball byproducts of the system or weird remnants of the systems that were in play in the prebiotic stage is still kind of a big open question. So does that kind of bring people kind of up to speed on that in this don't pause fiction of the Miller-Urey experiment?
Indeed. Where do they?
So we get to eyeballs in the Cambrian.
Where did the clay come in? The clay that I always mispronounce. What is it? Montmorillonite or something of that sort?
Yeah, it's like that. Yeah, I always get it tongue twisted around too. Yeah, it's a clay that has an interesting set of properties because stuff can kind of attach to it, and you can have things that will sort of replicate along its surface. There's a whole bunch of material done on that research. I've got a slew of them. Let me see if I can even find out. I got my bibliography still up. I was working on I can pull up the word here, find the bits on it, and yeah, there we go. For a factor, effective inhibitors on the Montmorillonite clay-catalyzed formation of RNA. Studies on the reaction pathway is just one of them. And a whole bunch of things on RNA dimers catalyzed on that surface. And formation of RNA oligomers on malachite. There's a bunch from Gozan Ertem and James Ferris, Michael Aldersley. There's a whole bunch of names that are popping up as workers in this field. Robert Hazen, he's been involved in research like that. 2008 paper, Abiotic Formation of RNA-like Oligomers by Montmorillonite, Catalysis Part 2. So there's a whole bunch on this stuff, which, by the way, creationists pay almost no attention to. Duh. And it's looking highly likely that the pieces of what's going on, surfaces in hydrothermal vent contexts, how deep down we don't know, the temperature ranges and things. There's a lot of work on that, and it's hard work to do. Number of researchers in the field. It's not exactly an easy way to make money. I mean, nobody is going to get in. Which do I want to be? Do I want to start up a gambling casino, or do I want to do origin of life research? Which is the road to wealth? There we go. Yeah, Memorial night.
Yeah, that stuff.
That stuff. Yeah. So if there's no more comments on that, I'll go into the eyeball issue and vision.
Okay.
It's been made, and I'm trying to remember the scientist that was offering it, and it's a legitimate one. What we see in the Cambrian are critters that definitely have stuff. You got Opabinia that's got little 5 doorknob-shaped eyes, and you got trilobites that have these schizochroal eyes eventually that are a little bit more like what happens with insects. Arthropods develop crystalline eye structures. Let's develop a little different kind of squishy bag approach that eventually turns into the eyeballs that we see in vertebrates. Is that an organism that can see what is potentially going to eat it and or look around to find things to eat is at an obvious advantage, so that there was a tremendous selection pressure. Another factor would involve the visibility factor. How visible were oceans? How were they a lot of cloudy gunk floating around in there, or were they a little bit easier to deal with? The deeper you are living, there is. So there's another argument to be made that as the ozone starts increasing, as oxygen starts being produced, it eventually leaks out of the oceans because of all the cyanobacteria farting oxygen, killing off anaerobic organisms. It rusts the oceans out first, that all of the iron that's in the oceans that was free iron started oxidizing. And the big banded iron things that are showing up about 2.5 billion years ago are a sign of the proliferation of these cyanobacteria that are farting their way to an oxygen atmosphere. Eventually, it leaks out into the atmosphere, and you start having oxygen levels rise, which breaks down and produces ozone, and the ozone starts reducing the ultraviolet factors, and so you start getting more and more habitability in water regions and also theoretically up on the land. Bacteria start colonizing the land, and eventually other little critters go up, and the rest is history. Now, during the Cambrian, compared to the Precambrian Ediacara biota in particularly, the one thing that we don't see on Ediacara biota particularly are eyeballs. Primarily the case that they don't have sensory systems, because there's an awful lot of opsin-related sensory modalities that can occur in tissue without it necessarily looking like an eyeball. But the idea of a dedicated vision system seems to be a Cambrian invention, or at least time we hit the Cambrian explosion, where we got these little critters that will preserve soft parts, so where you can see what's going on, they've come up on that. The connection between that and the oxygen is also relevant, because oxygen levels are rising. The more oxygen is now available as a free fuel, so organisms that are adapted to making use of oxygen have more of it to play with. So that may have also acted as a feedback loop. We also know that predation is showing up, and that's happening before the Cambrian explosion. We've got the little Claudinia, which is a kind of a tubular-shaped organism that's maybe about an inch or so long. And we don't know what the hell was living inside of it, because there are no Lagerstätten deposits that preserve them. But there are an awful lot of them with little boreholes in them. The implication is that something has the capability to gnaw its way into the shell to eat whatever it's inside because it wants to. the critter is making a shell to begin with is because there are things out there that can bore holes that will eat you. Much of that is going on without any ability to see visually, we don't know. How many of the little critters that are slinking along that are making the trace fossils in the Precambrian, how many of them has had sensory systems but not yet eyeballs? Now, we know a bit more about the genetics of this than we did. The PAX6 gene, in particular, is a ubiquitous gene for eyeballs across the spectrum of organisms. So it isn't as though every eyeball is descended from an initial visual system. It's that the PAX6 gene pops up routinely because apparently it's working effectively to connect up with things that end up as visual sensing systems. So this can be developing convergently in a bunch of different lineages, way far removed from the one that leads off to metazoans, although we're way removed from Luca at this stage by a couple billions of years. It's still an open book as to what factors are playing exactly what, because we don't have any logger statement deposits for these earlier periods. So we can't tell what the soft tissues are. And almost all the work has to be done retroactively, working backwards from the gene systems of organisms that currently survive. And if you don't constantly remind yourself that when you're looking at a choana flagellate or you're looking at a the flatworm, you're looking at organisms that are themselves a billion years removed from the critters that would be the ones that would be involved in this period that's leading up to the Ediacara biota that are leading up to the Cambrian explosion. And so it's a hard amount of retroactivity of working, but there's an awful lot they've been to surmise on that. My guesstimation would be that you're entering into a very dynamic feedback loop after the hyperglaciation that killed off, that when it ended, the climate changed over a fairly abrupt period of time, and the Ediacara biota that dominated the world for tens of millions of years just collapsed. There was a big mass extinction. And little critters that are the ancestors of the ones that become the Cambrian explosion have a chance to start to proliferate. They don't do it right away, and that's another pattern that we can see, that there's an extinction pulse, that when we switch from the Cambrian into the early Cambrian, there's this Manichaean phase, is the very earliest part, and the Manichaean and Timoshan phases together cover at least 5 to 10 million years, and that's twice as long as it took to go from Lucy the Australopithecine to Ken Ham, so that's a long time. You've got the Manichaean phase. We know Claudinia was still going on at that phase, still getting things trying to eat it. Oh, a hell of a lot else. It seems there's almost devoid of critters that are showing up in the fossil record. Is it because nothing was alive? No, it's probably because nothing was alive that left soft parts, hard parts that you could preserve, and there's no logger staten class deposits. Then the next phase, the Timoshan, we get a gear shift. There's these small shelly fauna that are shaped like little itty bitty ice cream cones that are not much bigger than a pinpoint. And there apparently are very primitive mollusks. They just are all over the place. They're found in Russia and all things, and because they're leaving little itty bitty shells, they're showing up in the fossil record. They're apparently some of the dominant critters of years. Again, you have to ask, why shells? Well, you make a shell because if you don't have a shell, you're dinner. So that there's a selection pressure and there's a predator-prey relationship. What was eating them? We don't know because there's no logger staten deposits. Then we go into the big Cambrian explosion. The Timoshan fauna are pretty much phased out into that big Cambrian period. Instead, you have much larger critters. You have more conventional ones that are more ancestral to regular mollusks. And you've also got a pile of arthropods. We can know this because we now have not one, not two, but 3 logger staten deposits. They're all from the equator at the along the northern rim of the Rodinia supercontinent that had formed by that time. That was mainly in the southern hemisphere, although there are little bits and pieces, stragglers of it that stick up into the north. There was presumably life all over the planet. Logger statens we've got are in this zone that was in the deep water to fairly shallow water deposits, one from China, Shengjiang, which is the oldest, and that's about, if memory serves me, I think it's like 540 million years ago, something like that. And then the Sirius Passet up in Greenland, which again, at the time was down in the equatorial regions. That's, I think, about 5 or 10 million years later. And then another 5 or 10 million years later, farther on, the Burgess Shale, the famous one from Canada. You get just piles of buggy things, some of which are arthropod groups that are going to lead off to real life groups that we're familiar with today, the chelicerates that are the spiders, scorpions, and horseshoe crabs, although the ones that are in the Cambrian are the ancestors. They don't even have the little chelicerate, but they're anatomically very closely related. The killer creature of the time, Anomalocaris, which was about 3 to 6 feet long and was known from both the Chinese end and the Burgess Shale end. It's a weird thing that's got these like pineapple-shaped squiggly round mouth, and it's got these tentacles that look like shrimp bodies. And originally they thought it was a bunch of different critters, and then they finally found a fossil where they were all together in one thing, and they go, well, wow. Anyway, it was the killer predator of its age. And it apparently is a very peculiar arthropod. We've got these what are called biramus appendages, which are these little linked body part, usually with gills attached. There's a whole slew of phyla that are built on that. It looks like an arthropod parts store, according to one paleontologist, and that's pretty true, most of which eventually went extinct. An interesting issue of how many of these early arthropods and critters that are extrapolating in the early Cambrian don't make the cut. And the ones that survived were ones that weren't necessarily super duper better than their opponents, but they were more resilient. They just had a little more diversity range. They could handle a little more tolerance. And so even though they weren't as successful as their cousins, in the long run, they made the cut. And they had what would be called evolvability. And that's a really important term that pops around at the higher level philosophy end. I'm going to look at all the things we got on here. In addition, there's a likelihood of a drop in hard radiation levels due to ozone. Yep, I made reference to that. More from Fino. Would that be a kind of keratinous shell like lobsters and similar seafood have, or more in line with the calciferous stuff from the snails and shells? Yeah, there's a big piece of this. The mollusks, of course, do a different material. Chitin comes with the chitins that are separate from the way mollusks do it. The carapaces of trilobites, we're not entirely sure what that's made of, although they have a ton of them. And they were a super duper, the trilobites lasted for hundreds of millions of years and then finally pooted out at the end of the Permian mass extinction. So they managed to be very, very durable on that. The developmental biology of this area, because in the last 20 years, we've discovered more about the homeobox genes and how the parts get put together. What eventually is going to happen in paleogenomics is they're going to get to the level where they're retroengineering extinct organisms. And the big nut to crack would be the Ediacara biota, because they've got these strange symmetrical forms that look like fronds and stuff, and they're not like anything that we can see today. And then the question is, are they being made from homeobox genes or something else altogether? If they are homeobox genes, and everything about what we know about how the proliferation of metazoans works suggests they should be, then we should be able to figure out what little switches had to go which way in order to produce that kind of organism, as opposed to the stuff that eventually ended up producing the arthropods and the chordates and the bunch of the echinoderms and all that stuff that's on the more familiar critter line. It was a long. Chitin, I'm not sure. That actually may be a stumper. I know that there's a little weird buggy-like thing that produces chitins, and they're kind of a very narrow little phylum, and I'm running entirely on my memory here. Some of its components, if memory serves me, are kind of related to the stuff that insects use to make their shells out of. The big proliferation with bugs, of course, took place when they developed flight. That was a colossal bit, because most animals fly, and once you figure out how to fly, wow, that gives you a colossal advantage. Vision is another. I will defer to you, Brian, on that. I will not be disputing that, because again, I was just riffing off of memory. Barrier hits hard. Yes, we always have. What we have here is a failure to communicate. There, Cy, you've been quiet.
I've been trying not to interrupt. I don't know if you want to dig into it now, but I have jotted down. We try to anything at the tail end of things, or when we're talking after, we try to jot it down to address at some point in the future.
Yeah.
I have written down in my pad, and I, for the life of me, can't remember why. CMB cold spot. What the hell were we talking about?
Actually turned out to be really delightful. because that was one of the subjects that Paulogia and I bumped into with the Answers in Genesis bunch. Is that there's a cute little cold spot in space. When we're talking cold spot, we're talking about a gigantic chunk of galactic size nippy that is a mystery in terms of Big Bang theory, and how essentially when you have the Big Bang, you have a relatively homogeneous, not absolutely homogeneous, it's a little lumpy, but relatively homogeneous mass of time-space energy that expands, and the four forces gradually work their way out, gravity being the one that drops out one of the first, and the strong and weak nuclear forces, and electromagnetism, and the weak nuclear force form electroweak. And you can simulate some of that in the particle accelerators that we have, but the deeper level is harder to do because you'd have to build a particle accelerator the size of a solar system. Anyway, the cold hole is odd to explain from a normal, this is our only universe thing. Multi-universes actually kind of predict that's going to happen. And what the argument is that what you're seeing there is the intersection of two multiverses in that zone of cold spot. That's a direct consequence of that kind of chafing of I'll use the term brain, B-R-A-N-E. There's membrane theory, and it gets condensed as brains. The idea that the universe has a whole mass, the metaverse, has a whole mass of these dimensional brains that are moving around in their own frame. And when they intersect, the areas where they cross produce instabilities that produce little tiny burps that we call universes. The result of these things are things that are in principle detectable. Not all multiverse theories are unobservable inside of our universe. Some of them produce theoretical effects on the way gravity waves propagate. And in the case of the cold spot, that's one of those things that are to be expected from some multiverse models. And so the people that did the paper pointed out that, well, yeah, that's actually evidence for a multiverse. Hey, this did not set well with the anti-multiverse gang in anti-evolutionism, both from the young Earth creationist end, because somebody obviously had sent a blurb in to AIG to comment on it, but also David Klinghoffer, the little troll at the Discovery Institute, was riffing off of this stuff too. It's revealing that neither one of them bothered to read the original paper or to pay attention to this thing. They were all riffing off of secondary sources. In the case of AIG, they were riffing off of that noted science journal, Fox News, who didn't even qualify as a secondary source. Fox News was riffing off of Phys.org's summary of the paper. So they were already umpteen steps away from the thing, and Fox News was incorrectly implying that this was all super duper theoretical. It wasn't anything that could relate to experiment or observation. Sorry, that's not quite what the fact is. My suspicion is branches of multiverse theory are probably true, in the same sense that string theory is probably true. But we'll find out as the dust settles, if I live long enough to see things. The science will continue to work on, and we can guarantee that none of that science will be done by an anti-evolutionist. Brains. So string theory has risen from the dead now. Yeah, it's fun because what we're seeing is a hilarious fistfight. You've got people in the physics community that absolutely despise string theory, and others who are the string theorists who absolutely despise the people who absolutely despise string theory. And because an awful lot of it is very abstract and it's trying to account for the data that we can observe and work out a model. And it's also, string theory is trying to accommodate gravitation, because at the moment, there is no direct way to link up quantum theory that occurs at the probabilistic level inside of matter and gravity, which operates kind of on a completely different relativity principle. And Einstein couldn't quite connect the dots. He didn't like quantum theory in particular. String theory is an attempt to resolve all of that. And even though there's an awful lot of pot shotting going back and forth between physics and when you'll have the talking head, whatever his name is, and he's the obligatory little guy that pops up on these science programs whenever they want to bring up some weird science topic. The dust will eventually settle out on this one. Some of it may be resolvable if you can build bigger particle accelerators, and some of it will be resolvable when they can get instruments that can measure some of these inter-universe interactions to test whether or not they're occurring or not. But we're finding it difficult just to pin down gravity waves. So the idea that this is going to be an issue that can be settled, in the next 20 minutes over a cup of coffee is not likely to be the case. But remember, what we've seen so far with quantum theory and all the other stuff is the universe is really strange. And it's certainly nothing that anybody in any religious document ever thought about. But yet we know the quantum theory works because we're using it. All of our little computers using integrated circuits are based on solid state physics that was developed because of how they figured out how solid state physics works because of quantum theory. So we're directly operating in a universe which only makes sense the way it does because that weird 1905 physics really works. Oh, yeah, that's you can find the original. It hasn't actually hit yet. In fact, it's in my pending list because it hasn't been published yet in the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society. Yikes, where the hell is it? It's in here somewhere. Yeah, Cold Spot in Space. There's my notes. The paper itself is title of Evidence Against a Supervoid Causing the CMB Cold Spot by Ruari Mackenzie et al. And it's going to be showing up eventually in the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society, but the preprint was in fact put up at Archive, and it is exactly the one that the link is there. They'll be able to get that paper. So thank you, Brian, for being Johnny on the spot on that. But they'll claim strings and brains for their books as soon as they are not just a mathematical guess with climate proof. Oh, yeah, that's quite true. Although it'll be fun to see, we know that creationists can co-opt material. So they've kind of sort of accepted natural selection and speciation and mutation. They kind of sort of accept plate tectonics, even though creationists didn't like it 30 or 40 years ago. Some of these aspects will be incorporated. I know you, Ross, over at Reasons to Believe, will do a variety of gymnastics to decide that somehow or other brain theory and strings were actually implied by Genesis 1:1, or he'll find some way of sneaking it into Leviticus if we work at it hard enough. And you'll find the same thing going on with people in the Quran and Hindu science apologists and all that kind of stuff. The ability to post hoc retrofit science into a religious frame is a cottage industry that shows no sign of ever stopping. I'll agree with you on that, Pino. Did you jot it down there, aside?
Wait,
we're getting close to.
Let's see what else we have jotted. Wow, that's what I sound like on here? Yeah, stop doing
anyway, the cold spot will come up in hopefully in some of the stuff that Paul did, because I looked into that. And it is reassuring, in air quotes, that intelligent designers and young Earth creationists, air quotes, reason in pretty much the same way when it comes to that sort of sciencey data. And it doesn't involve them reading the primary sources. Their curiosity does not get to mouse click, oh, download, oh, eyeball. And I'm a lazy effer. I figure if I can do it, what the hell stops them? I mean, their little mouse clicker finger suddenly sees up. No, it's because their method is terrible. Yes, you're quite right, Fino. Yeah, maybe not YEC, but surely the Muslims, they'll find all scientific wonders in the Quran. There's a small body of Quranic science apologetics literature, and our local Muslim community here repeats that kind of stuff. They find all sorts of extremely tendentious descriptions of things on childbirth and health issues and some vague physics ideas that they are insisting exist in some of the surahs. And holy moly, nobody in his right mind would ever draw that conclusion, but they're grasping for straws. In the same way, we get into that same class. The archetype here is the circle of the earth in Isaiah, where people will attempt to show that this is proof that the Bible recognized that the earth was a sphere. A pie plate and a pizza are all circles, but they are not spherical. And there was nobody in the old biblical context that really thought about that in any fundamental way until they had to deal with Aristotelian science when they started incorporating that into the church doctrines in the Middle Ages, by which time it was just assumed that it was the spherical Earth because that's what the evidence suggested, and they wanted to be up to date. So you still had a few hangers-on, Cosmos Induplicustes, or whatever his name was, from I think the 4th century, heels and trying to maintain a flat Earth model. And that showed that there was in the subculture, if we had Twitter back in the 1st century, we probably would have discovered just exactly how popular flat Earthism was in the God of Abraham set, but we don't. So we have to kind of infer it from.
All right. Oh, here's one that we've pushed off twice so far, and
Ooh.
Looking at that, no, don't get all happy. It's 8:56. You're gonna push it off again because this is the one we said was gonna eat up a whole show.
Oh, what one was that?
This was the evolution cannot explain how life first appeared on the Earth. That's
Yeah, well, in fact, I touched a little bit on that with the discussion of the Miller-Urey experiment.
yeah.
So in a way, we haven't pushed it off. And that's as far as the science is standing. The short answer is we don't know how life originated. The long answer is we have a lot more clues that it was probably a natural phenomenon. But the even longer answer is, who the hell cares? Change the reptile-mammal transition data. It doesn't make any of the evolution for billions of years that we do in fact have and can see in great detail. None of that goes away based on how life originated. So the origins or bust argument in principle is a fascinating red herring, but the people who use it are trying to use it as a push off of the field all the science data that they don't want to pay attention to. But I'm sorry, it doesn't make the reptile-mammal transition go away. That exists independent of how life originated billions of years ago.
All right.
Oh, that's interesting. In Jewish, circle and sphere still same word. That's very possible. Some of the weird things that pop up in religion apologetics do occur because of mistranslations. There's a small cottage industry on that. The famous line about it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven may have been a mistranslation, because the word kamelos in Greek is almost identical to kamelos, which is hawser, the thick rope you use on a ship. And so what the original text may have said is it's easier to put a great big rope through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven. And somebody mistranslated it as camel because the words were almost the same, and there it went. And then, of course, the famous Parthenos, or whatever the name is for a virgin and young girl in Aramaic, that led to the virgin birth element in Christianity, also apparently due to a mistranslation. Even our constellation of Aries, the ram, is a mistranslation, because the original Babylonian one was a plowman, and the term for plow in Babylonian was a little too much like the word for ram, and it got mistranslated into Greek, and so that became Aries the ram. So this happens all the time in culture. We just can't help it. It's all a telephone game. But Poseidon, I will comment, flat Earth is just religious nonsense. That's largely the case, yes. If you look at the flat earthers, most of them are extremely wackaloon religious fundamentalists who draw ultimately on the Bible, even though they may not mention it. And if you weeded out all of the young Earth creationist, geocentrist, religious, Bible-believing flat earthers from the it's going to be a really small set. So it's largely driven by the ideology that the Bible teaches a flat Earth, and therefore it's flat, and they'll figure out how to make it fit. And as Cy knows, my gosh, they're good at knocking off the parts, aren't they?
Indeed. Well, all right.
Yeah, Pheno's very, very accurate on that. It's not limited to Christians, Tao. We just see more of them because they are more present here on YouTube. Yeah, the dynamic, we're seeing a data selection thing. I suspect if you've got the equivalent of Twitter, you're reading in Arabic or Hindi, you're going to find that exact same mindset. They're just pushing different sets of dogmatic structure. The English apologetics that you can see for Hindu creationism, for Native American creationists, there are Native American creationists who insist they didn't migrate from Asia. The late Vinnie Deloria Jr. was an example of that. So they're all over the place, and we can find their methodological counterparts even in the non-religious. There are some of them may end up as anti-vaxxers, some of them can end up as Big Bang skeptics, or there's a wide range in thinking wrong, but the method that you use to get to be wrong for everybody.
Did you see Eat's question?
Oh, I hate a question. How did the transition from reptiles to mammals go? And is there a 500-page tome on the subject that I or anyone could buy and read? Oh, Mr. Schill, I thank you for bringing that up. There just happens to be a wonderful book, Evolution Slam Dunk, by somebody called R.J. Downard. My, that's me. And you can find the link to that at #tip. You can find it on Amazon.com. I will repeat, Dunk, Why the Reptile-Mammal Transition Proves Macroevolution and How Anti-Evolutionists Ignore It. And I think Paul has my book. Cy has my book. As paleontologist Christine Janis describes it in a review on Amazon, it is an incredible tour de force. It covers the material in a way nobody has ever covered before. It's such a wonderful pileup of science data. Why don't we know about this stuff more? Why aren't we using it more? And that's why it's important to do. I needed to write this book. I churned it out very, very quickly, and I think I did a damn good job. I would have loved to have had pictures in it. If it can ever get so many people buying it, hint, 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 and telling people about it that I can get a regular publisher for it, I'd love to do an illustrated version because the various charts and fossil data and all that kind of stuff that I'm alluding to that are in the papers that I cite, I'd love to have in the book. And it'll probably be an 800-page book under those circumstances, but it'll be a really neat one. And everybody who gets Slam Dunk will be ahead of the game. You will know all that science data up to speed for 2016, and you will know every possible counter-argument anti-evolutionists have ever thrown at the reptile-mammal transition. And after you've started snorting your drink through your nose from the humor of how stupid they are on this subject uniformly, you'll be able to counter them with confidence because you'll have all the data set under your thing. So thank you for that extremely self-serving question, Paul.
All right, let's do a little housekeeping here for the RJ theme song. A couple things to consider. Try to avoid copyrighted stuff if you can. I mean, there's and you can check in. You know how Google has the sound library for YouTube. You can also put in a song name there, and it'll report the status. You know, like put in a commercial song. Like,
oh yeah. Any tune that you bring up, make sure that it's something that we don't get into a lawsuit. Either that, or we have to do the Conan approach of either have a tune that sounds suspiciously like that, or can only go like about so many seconds before you violate the copyright rules. There's a bunch of things on that. I'll have to let you kids work out the little fiddly bit details on that.
my friend's a musician. He indicates that copyright allows for 8 bars, so I'll have to get some clarification on that. Anyway, if you can avoid heavily copyrighted stuff, it would be handy.
Fino, Fino pointed out that the connection lost a bit. I'll type in the thing. Just go Evolution Slam Dunk.
All right. So for
yeah, it'll pop up.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a lag. Anyway, for song suggestions, best thing so we don't lose or miss any. Don't want anyone to miss opportunity to get a fine Darwin fish for their vehicle. It would be best to just email it. Email it to me, and I will.
Are you sending out the Darwin fishes, Cy? Is that your contribution?
Yeah. That's the big prize. That's the big prize I can think of. If anybody can think of a better prize, and no, a new Mazda is not going to be on the list of prizes, but but anyway, if you want
Oh, now maybe if we reached Oprah Winfrey level of finances, or Ken Ham or something like that, we could pull out prizes like that. But I'm
to,
afraid we're not nearly so well heeled.
not yet. But anyway, email your song suggestions for RJ's review. I'll put them all together and get the actual songs for him to hear, and submit them over to RJ so he can pick one. And the email is scistrike at sciencestrikeforce, all one word, .com. But you all see where scistrike came from, right? Okay.
Yeah,
Anyway.
we got it all figured out there. Yeah. Also, anybody who wants to ask for topics or questions or stump the RJ or anything like that can tweet me directly at RJ Downard on Twitter, or at the hashtag tip website. There's all those little comments tabs that are just hearing cricket noises. You can pop in any old time and put a question. I check that daily, assuming my electric power is on, which is dicey at the moment.
Alrighty. Let's see. All right, you know what? We're no theme song for the closing because everybody hated my pick so far. I think I just lucked out with the pug song. That's just too freaking cool. Damn it though. I'm sorry. You got to see the commercial though. Please take special note of the link at the bottom. That would be very
The
handy
more the merrier there. We can do so much together.
indeed. And this is one
Anxious
for
to help in every way I can.
excellent. All right. Well, there was the commercial. In case anybody missed it, it looks sort of like this. And I don't know if I mentioned it. Do this. Okay. That's anybody who's thinking of going over to my Patreon. Screw that. Like I told you a long time ago, just show up. That's good enough. Go to the one we just showed you there. It would help out RJ a lot. So I think I was clear, wasn't I, RJ? Was that clear enough?
Yeah. We can do so much together. Our opponents, unfortunately, are really good at linking up. Oh, someone stored your book on Amazon. Yes.
One
Oh, yes.
star.
Actually, I've gotten quite a good reviews. One guy who was a troll put up a nasty review of it, and he went over, in fact, produced another nasty review of my novel at the same time, and it was quite clear he had never read either one of them. And his problem was that when he trolled, he put himself under the name of somebody else who I actually was in contact with, and they pointed out that this guy was using somebody else's name in vain. So they eliminated some of that. You can pay attention mainly to Christine Janis's review, since the others are lay persons and they've liked the book as well. But Christine Janis is a working paleontologist, and she had my book on her own, her own mammal book based on information in it. So this is operating at the level of professional science level. This is not some little cute little blog post where RJ decided to have as his hobby, he's going to write a little book on the mammals. Oh, isn't that sweet? No, I've done my homework on this damn thing.
You're reading my review out loud. Anyway.
Yeah. RJ is what a cute little hobby you have, Mr. Downard. Isn't that sweet? It's go and mow the lawn. The problem is nobody had written a damn book on this subject. It was a gaping hole, as I pointed out in the book. Dawkins doesn't use any material on it. Robert Prothero barely mentions it, and nobody was responding to the criticisms by anti-evolutionists. And given how spectacularly bad they are, you need to know. You need to be up on speed on this. So anybody can offer the reptile-mammal transition as the killer app. You can be familiar with Archaeopteryx and hominids and Tiktaalik and all that, and I certainly am. But boy, hit with the damn reptile-mammal transition. You got a slam dunk on that one. And you got all the props necessary, all the body parts you got with our jaw. We carry it around with us. We don't need a PowerPoint. Carry around props. We've got all the data needed in our own selves. So wow, that's the perfect tool kit. You can respond to anti-evolutionists right on site with it, and just wait for them to bring up John Widmer app or somebody, and then go whoop with the anvil, and that's the end of that.
Indeed. All right. Oh, by the way, everyone, looking at the clock, we've officially concluded RJ's Evolution Hour.
We gone over.
Now, that does not mean anything, really. It just means we changed the title from this part forward to Gabbin' with RJ. So that's what you're doing now.
Yeah, because I love to field things, and the interactions that I get on stuff. That's why I like to pay close attention to the questions, and the feedback on that, because that's where I hear what you're thinking about. Can lead into really interesting areas that might not have come up otherwise.
Indeed. All right, and let's see. I don't know. Guys? Did I mention this? I think I mentioned that, right? Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty. I just didn't want
Shameless
to.
plug too.
I didn't want to forget. Because if I forgot, I'd have to bring it up like that. So anyway, okay. There we go.
I am new. I am new to the Patreon biz. I'm new to the GoFundMe thing. Just to be clear about the thing, what had started out as a hobby when I was just working in the regular world turned into a big project that was remaining a hobby until I got laid off and had to go on Social Security early. And boy, is that been a speed bump. So I've been trying with the GoFundMe and now with the Patreon, and of course with the revenue from the books, to have enough irons in the fire so that I can keep going. In principle, it's a low budget operation. I need to have internet connection. I need to have electric power. I need paper and ink because I do print up material and sort material out and follow up on stuff. I don't have to print up hard copies on everything. A first page of a PDF will do. And in the rare circumstances when I had better money than I had, I like to buy the incoming material. I haven't been able to get some of the newer stuff. Jonathan Wells is out with a new book, Zombie Science, and the Discovery Institute is just preening about that. Well, you got to have the book to be able to see exactly where he's tripping up. I know from his other books that he screwed up royally. Icons of Evolution is a mess. The Design of Life that he did with Dembski is a mess. I cover quite a few of the mistakes because they stepped into the reptile-mammal transition on that one. And so I covered quite a lot of that in Slam Dunk. But our opponents are moving targets, and they're doing a lot of things in their social networks to, and we need to be ahead of them so that we can drop anvils on them rather than trying to catch up with the anvil and see if we can drop on them after the facts. Oh, okay, I have a non-evolution related question. Behind you, which one of those books do you pull to activate the secret door that leads to your bat cave? Those are CDs, not books. In fact, on the left are CDs and on the right are DVDs. Those are all stuff that I'd collected over years when the CD was a new thing. And it's virtually all classical music. That's my big interest. I fell in love with stuff back when I was just hitting puberty. My sister was betting that when I grew up, I'd be loving the Beatles too. Well, I do actually like the Beatles, but nonetheless, I'm a classical music guy. And I get a perfectly fine diet of popular music just from the popular culture, from television shows and all the rest. And I have no problem with music. I like even country and western, rap, Hamilton, wonderful. But for my sustenance thing, I've got the classical music mode. And the DVD collection started out way before DVDs with CED discs and laser discs and VHS tapes and beta tapes and all that. And the principle was, I come from an ancient day before you had home video. Imagine the miracle it was in the 1970s and 80s to be able to actually bring a movie home and watch it on demand. The old thing where the only way you ever saw a movie was on television or a film revival. And so there were years, I had heard about Citizen Kane for years, and I never had a chance to see the damn thing until it finally came out on home video. And then I could actually acquire a copy of it and see whenever I liked and study it. So the technology has advanced. We've moved from the DVD to the Blu-ray, sound quality, picture quality, multiple audio tracks, documentary things, interactivity. To where we have picture quality that's spectacular, to where you can see the movie as it was when it originally came out, and we can put it on with as much ease as we would a film score or a pop piece of music that we have, or stream it live now for people with that. Think how fabulous that is as a technology.
Ooh, there's a question.
Somebody says, why would RJ have just a bat cave? Of course, let me tell. Okay, what is a CD? Oh yes, I know. Those are ancient times. It's like a phonograph record played with a beam of light. Isn't that amazing? I know you've addressed this before, but I'm senile. Why isn't evolution slam dunk in hardback? Because it's damn self-published. I went through CreateSpace, which is Amazon.com's in-house printing thing, which allows any old schmuck to print a book. And any old schmuck can print a book. I would love to do a hardcover version. I would love to do an illustrated version. I'd like to do an illustrated version of Paralogs of Phileas Fogg. I've got the pictures for the various places that occurred in the story I'd love to do. And believe me, that I think would make Slam Dunk an even more powerful thing. When you can see the chart from 1975, so you can literally see the points that I'm bringing up as to why Gish is misrepresenting that source material, that only strengthens my case. And there's an awful lot of things on the fossil data and the gene splittings and a lot of the things about endosymbiotic processes where a good picture is just absolutely delicious. The stuff on the formation of feather follicles and the placodes and that, there's just some fabulous graphics in those papers. And I would need to have somebody have the rights to work that out so I don't get my ass sued off before I would be able to put them in there. Ooh, speaking of caves, do you think burrowing was a major factor in the Denovian extinction survival? So are we talking about the ones with up with there? I think that's still dust settling on that as to what was going on there, whether they were being brought there by some other hominid or by themselves. The dating, of course, has just turned out to be way younger than what they had initially thought. So they're only a few 100,000 years old, not a million or so. And that's one I'll just have to put the old question mark stamp. Let the dust settle a bit first on that one. Wrong direction, RJ. You should say like on MP3 in form of a big shiny piece of plastic your computer could read. Yeah. Well, I don't get hung up on modality. That's the one thing. All information is indistinguishable. I don't care what formats it in. So to me, the fact that something was in one format in one stage and becomes a different format in another one doesn't bother me. In the same way that it never throws me off as to whether or not it's a science paper or whether or not it's a video or whether or not it's in a lawyer paper or whether or not it's on cuneiform tablets. Information is information. And the question is how you deal with the information. The fact that you have access to clarity and completeness. So the ability to see a movie full length. Times when I was seeing a perfectly fine example was Cleopatra. Before it came out on home video, the only form you could see, that's the Elizabeth Taylor Cleopatra, was on television. And with commercials, they would show it over 2 nights in 2 2-hour blocks. So you were actually seeing about 3 hours of the movie, except the movie's 4 hours long. So you were already missing a third of the movie right there. And as it turns out, this version of the film, the one that was the roadshow version, was 5 hours long. So there is a missing hour of film footage that probably is lost forever. Who knows, some of the best scenes may have been cut. There was a lot of people that were fabulously impressed with the roadshow version of that. And we don't have any way of finding it out because all we've got is the version that we can see. So we're in an age when we have so much more information that are partially completed, like Lost Horizon, the famous Frank Capra classic, soundtrack, and most of the film footage and still photographs for some of the scenes, so you can have a working version of the movie, and I strongly recommend viewing that one. I love to see what an artist originally creates, and the extent to which it gets boulderized by people editing it down or colorizing it, which was a fad that was going on 20 years ago that fortunately has kind of faded away, although it can be fun. There's a bit where some of the technology is advanced to where you can do some interesting playing around with colorizing. Some of the old I Love Lucy episodes and that they've done that with. They've even figured out a way that you could recreate digitally a widescreen version that would show more of the set. And there's a bunch of things you can play with. And I'm not objecting to that. But I do like to see the original version too. That's why off that you can't see on Blu-ray the original version of Star Wars. Yes, there's a version of it where he's tinkered with it and played with it, and that's fine. But I'd like to see the original version uncut, unmodified too, and then as well as the other stuff. So Spielberg does a better job of this than George Lucas does in terms of having the archival version where you can get all the versions of Close Encounters all on Blu-ray. to where you can see whichever version you feel happy with. So there's my rant about information flow and distortion in home video. Blackadder, I like Blackadder. That was fun.
Hey, here's one that
To
scrolled
a
by.
cuneiform version of Slam Dunk 3.
Here's one that scrolled by. I don't know if you saw. It's one that looks like would actually be a little fun, or you might want to save it for next week. It was from Old Scratch. Did you see that one? How would evolution
Nope,
relate?
read it out.
How would evolution relate to free will? That's a fun one because you got
Ooh, that is a really good
it.
question.
It's
In
forked
fact,
from the
that's
beginning.
still hot topic fistfights.
Indeed. Do you want to save it because that's going to take a little time?
Well, I feel like I'll comment. We can always go back to it because it's an ongoing issue.
Okay.
Jerry Coyne, in particular, if anybody who follows why evolution is true, Jerry Coyne just can't stand the idea of free will. And there's a big divide going on in the neurobiology bunch as to what is going on. Do we have free will or not? And it all boils down to a conceptual problem about if all of our biological systems in our brain are ultimately mechanistic, that effectively everything we think we do because of our free will is in fact the product of all these little biological systems just doing their own little shtick. The problem comes with the idea of self-referentialism and the idea that our self-awareness and the thing that we call free will is a system that in effect observes another system while being part of its own system, but it's not part of the system it observes. It's reflecting off of it in a synergy. And that in that, the thing that we end up calling free will comes in. I actually address quite a bit of that issue in chapter 6 of the old #tip, which is why I'm so frustrated that more people have not gone to my damn website and read the old material. Download the thing on Planet of the Apes, where I go into that. I'm pretty sure it's in that chapter. Yeah, chapter 5, because it relates to consciousness issues. There was a wonderful journalist, Nora Tranders, who was from Denmark, who had written a really interesting book on the subject, where he goes into the issue of the I versus the me, and it also relates to Benjamin LeBay's work on volition, where it seems as though the brain decides in advance the kinds of things you need to do that you eventually decide you're making a choice on, when in fact the brain decided it for you in advance. Part of the material that gets delved into by or bounced off of by Daniel Dennett and secondarily Jerry Coyne. I think free will may be one of those undecidable propositions because we can't get outside of the system enough to be able to investigate it, and you can't devise a regimen that can isolate it. There are all sorts of problems. We get into it in physics with how do you figure out what the actual speed of light is one way, the clock calibration problem. We get into it with the qualia problem. When you see a particular color, like on the screen, the browns of the chairs that you can see on the screen. Are we all seeing the same brown? Even if we have identical monitors, if we were seeing the physical chair in our very own room, would we be perceiving the same brown? There's literally no way to tell. There's no experiment that you can devise, and it drives cognitive theorists up the wall because they're up against the inability to get past the modality of the fact that we perceive things inside our own heads. You can measure the wavelengths of light. You can measure what kind of brain cells are firing. In fact, there's a brand new paper that just came out that's gobsmacking, where they've actually been able to decode how primate brains perceive faces. And they're able to reconstruct, just based on the firing of the brain, as they're seeing, and it's matching up beautifully with the actual face they were shown. So basically, they've decoded how the brain sees images in that level, down to the actual image. And there's an awful lot of that that's going to relate to how much of that qualia problem can be figured out at the mechanistics level. But we're not out of the woods yet on free will. Don't count free will out. There's an issue of, even if we don't have free will, if we believe we have free will, we behave differently. A culture that believes in free will does things that are better than a culture that doesn't believe in free will. And some of that's actually measurable. Jerry Coyne doesn't like work in that area either. He tends to tunnel vision in on just 1 or 2 papers that have been done in that area rather than a lot of the other issues. So that's a long subject matter that's ongoing. I hope that answered a little bit of it. And I hope people will, all the stuff at TIP whether it's in HTML format that's on the Tuken.com site, or the big stuff, the full Megillah, WordPress.com, all of that is bloody open access. You can share it with anybody you like. That's why it's in PDF format, so you can't edit it. It's up there for everybody to use. Pass it around, tell people about it, get at it. I know for people that are on iPhones and the like, PDFs are a pain in the ass, and I'm sorry. PDF is a standard format. It's used in the sciences for the format from any technical paper, and I figure that should be okay. You can do text search now in PDFs if you have the latest readers, so there's an awful lot of searchability in there. You can download a thing, and if you're looking up a particular topic and that, you can find out whether it's covered or not, even without an indexing. So the stuff is all there. That there's a lot of contribution. The human evolution chapter, I think it's a book-length thing on its own, because it goes into the history of how anti-evolutionists approach the problem, and it goes into the issue of consciousness, the Cartesian theater, why we're self-aware, what art and our philosophies are doing, and the issues of free will. All of that stuff comes in as a natural result of figuring out how did we get to be us. Piece together clues about consciousness and language issues just from tool use. And there's a whole fascinating literature that's popped up on that of what you can tell about what's going on in the mind of a Homo erectus based upon what you need to think about in order to be able to recreate the tool. You have to literally imagine what the tool is inside the tool before you start chopping at the block. Just exactly like Michelangelo deciding what's inside the block of marble. And that's necessary to do to recreate those tools. So there's a lot of stuff in here where you can kind of end run around the cognitive issue and make deductions about things from the results of stuff forensically. Silence.
Well, and since we're in the gabbing with RJ, hey, why don't you throw up, since you are a mod now, why don't you throw up links to important stuff like your Patreon and your GoFundMe in the public chat there?
Oh, okay. Yep, I'll definitely put that one. They can find almost everything just at the main website. I've already got there, and plus it's a cute little lure to force people to get to the damn WordPress.com site and make use of it. So right there, bingo. Anybody that links on that will have links to not only all the PDFs, but on the GoFundMe, all through that one portal. And then the only other one will be the stupid Patreon. And so I shouldn't say stupid Patreon, but I'm an irreverent person. I plead guilty to that. I take nothing as sacred, and I tend to have a sarcastic way of the way I am. One thing I do hold sacred is individual thought, and the point that you need always to try to find out what you think is true. Never defend a position you don't believe. Say things that you doing because it sounds good, or that it's politic, or you're ass kissing. And maybe that's one of the reasons I've never been very successful, is because I never learned the art of sycophancy that apparently the Trump cabinet has learned really well.
Oh, God. Don't get me laughing at that again. Are you talking about the circle of praise?
My jaw dropped on that one. Holy moly. I don't think Nero has near a bunch of sycophants circulating around him. I think he got more pushback. Hitler got more pushback in the Führer bunker than we're getting from the Trump cabinet. Wow.
I had never seen anything like that. But anyway.
Yeah, literally, yes. When you look at somebody like, if you've seen the film Lincoln, it gives a fair representation of the very strong personalities that were in the Lincoln cabinet. And believe you me, ass kissing was not one of their traits. And that shows you how brilliant Lincoln was, because he was able to corral people who were very bright people, and many of whom thought they were brighter than he was. Certainly that was the case with Seward, his Secretary of State. In the end, Seward eventually confessed to his wife, you know, in the room with Lincoln, Lincoln is the one who's the smartest man in the room. He finally dawned on him that Lincoln was so smart, he appeared not to be the smartest person in the room. That's how good he was. He would always just be this, aw shucks, tell a little story and a little bit about this and that. But his mind, he memorized whole Shakespeare plays verbatim. Here was a perfectly fine example of an American genius who was virtually self-taught, he had a fabulous interest in science. Darwin's books were on his bookshelves. He hadn't apparently read most of them because he was too busy running the country and saving it. And he would probably have gotten around to reading On the Origins of Species after he retired and gone on his post-retirement trip around to the Levant and places. But sorry, that nitwit John Wilkes Booth nipped that one in the bud. Thanks a lot. Well, Brian, it says business has taken over our government is all there is to it. It's a bit more complicated than that. Certainly, business groups like to influence things that are greasing their wheels. But the primary group that's influencing the Trump administration is not business so much, conservatism. That culture war framework that I hear from the creationism venue, that's the defining characteristic of almost everybody there. There are some of the people, Minchin and a few others are circulating in another area, and to some extent Tillerson would represent a more conventional business framework. But if you look at Rick Perry, if you look at Betsy DeVos and Ben Carson and Vice President Pence, these people are absolutely knee-deep in that Tony Perkins culture camp, culture war conservatism. And they are pro-business, or at least pro-big business, or at least pro-business of the type that they schmooze with in their conventions. But you've got wealthy people like Joe Soros or Bill Gates and others who are billionaires and rich people who are not in that culture camp framework. And these are people that the Trumplandias are not going to be listening to. So it's a bit more complicated than that. And I'm a free market capitalist, so I'm looking at it from this area that what we get into in dangers, and this is why the deregulationism of Trump is worrisome, is that when you get a thing where industry lobbyists are the ones doing the tax code, which is, and the regulations, which is because they have more influence in Congress in that area than they do even with the presidents floating back and forth. Then you get a matter that special interests get special things favoring them. And in the 19th century, it's no coincidence that the industries that had the worst labor records were the ones that were the most heavily protected from tariffs. Road again, boy, that's a good idea. And that had such terrible issues over competition. Competition in a nice framework is really good. The reason why cars are so damn good today is because the Japanese have been nipping at our heels, and now the Koreans are nipping at the Japanese heels, and you've got everybody competing with everybody else, and you have cafe standards that force everybody in the industry to play on a level playing field until the Trumplandia comes along and tries to revise the rules now, where you then let market forces figure out how to do the thing that is a social good. That people don't realize that that's part of the role of government as a regulatory and oversight agency. Then you just get, well, whatever the industry feels like doing is fine with me, and I'm not going to bother looking to see whether or not it's a good idea or not. That's a recipe for depressions. It's a recipe for environmental disasters. It's a recipe for the stock market bubble that we went through in 2008. And so fasten your seatbelts, buckaroos. It's going to be a fun couple of years.
Indeed, I do get that impression. Even with the
sorry for the digression into ecological politics and all that, but it interacts. The decisions we make are going to affect us for years in many cases, and we've got to be careful to see what's happening.
And with what's going on now, it would be sort of disingenuous for us to just say nothing. When
no, it's worse than disingenuous. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
Because these things, Donald Trump apparently hasn't got the memo, but he's our employee now. The moment he got sworn in, he is our servant. He likes to think he's an emperor, in the same way he is to the presidency what Charles Foster Kane was going to be to the governor of New York, if you have ever seen Citizen Kane. That somebody who is this guy who's going to do it all for you, but he's always going to make sure he comes out, get in his way. That's the kind of problems we get into. We still have a representative democracy. We still have states with state houses. There are creationists knocking around in a lot of those positions as well. And we've let that go on a little too long. If more people used a methods approach, the thing that is the most insidious that's coming out of the Trump administration is not a regulation, it's that fake news, lying media trope. This is really anti-American, anti-democratic. This is something that undermines the notion of a free and independent press. And if there's anybody on earth who has no damn right to lecture about fake media, it's Donald Trump, who just swallows hook, line, and sinker absolute twaddle off of the internet. This is the last person on earth who should be saying that. And to the extent that we don't come up and forcefully defend the truth, we're acting complicit by our silence. And nudge, I can't be silent.
Indeed. And even those who wish to remain silent, it's getting harder.
Yeah, Fimo like the Kane Trump thing. Yeah, that's Charles Foster Kane. That's those who haven't seen Citizen Kane, correct that. It's one of the great motion pictures ever made. It's one of the most special effects laden movies up until Star Wars, although it's not thought of in that context. The people involved in it went on to do spectacular things. The screenwriter was the guy that did Cleopatra, to show connections there. Robert Wise, who was the screen editor on Citizen Kane, went on to do little things like The Day the Earth Stood Still and The Sound of Music and Star Trek the Motion Picture and West Side Story and all of that. The people who were changed by the way the film was constructed, it changed the way films looked, how they were edited, but in terms of its content, movie, there are poignant moments. It's about a tragic character who could have been good, crushed everything around him, frittered away opportunities and wealth and position, who was a hyper egotist, who always tended to think of himself first. That there's a narcissistic streak to Charles Foster Kane that is eerily reminiscent, except Charles Foster Kane is more talented than Trump and more agreeable and personable. I could probably withstand a Kane administration more easily than a Trump administration. That's a scary thought.
Alrighty. What do you think? Oh, what? Saw something?
I don't think RJ would be a fan. I'm not sure. You might be surprised. I'm not as fuddy-duddy as I look, even though I'm an old fart. I like a thing with a good beat. I like a thing, if it's got lyrics, I hopefully can listen to the lyrics. If it's got a few twists, if it's got a little dissonance in it, I like that. Remember, I'm a Charles Ives fan from classical music. Oh, and we don't want to go on about Alex Jones. Holy smokes, there's a whole universe of twaddle and dangerous twaddle. I mean, there is an example of somebody with millions of followers on his every word. And if there's anybody that's got a Tortugan alert that's flashing continuously, that's Alex Jones. Influence that he does and the connections that he does should scare the bejabbers out of you if you have any bejabbers left to scare. Once again.
Let's see. That's okay.
I follow Alex Jones on Twitter. I put him on my to follow list. I don't follow every nitwit and Nimrod. It is one of those little litmus test things that there are a lot of people who follow him. The other ones that I follow are Ann Coulter and Dinesh D'Souza. Litmus test people, because the people they connect to are more of that culture camp network. So just with a few people, you can see the tip of the Wackaloon iceberg out there without necessarily having to follow thousands of people to do it.
Oh, very good. Well, we've gone a little over. What do you think, RJ?
Colbert does in his late show is great, though. Yes, I've seen that. He does an absolutely horrifyingly accurate depiction of, I've forgotten the character name he tells about the guy that he came up with for his Alex Jones parody, but the intensity, the stream of consciousness, the weirdness of it. Colbert, the great voices of our time, and the fact that his show is shot into the top Fallon for the ratings is no coincidence. Fallon is a very talented, ingratiating, wonderful entertainer. But at this moment in history, Colbert is a pulse of things that are really mattering. And Fallon is just a light fluff of meringue by comparison. He does some criticisms and humor and the monologues and all of that. But we're living in dangerous times. We're living in an age when public is at stake. And Colbert is holding that mirror up to us so we can't avoid looking at it in a way that Fallon isn't. The other one that I enjoy a great deal, and I make a point of watching him, is he's on right after Fallon, Seth Meyers. He does some really trenchant commentary there. Samantha Bee is another one. She is absolutely razor sharp and brilliant. So then Trevor on a replacement for his name on the Nightly Show. Yeah, my old fart, my brain is congealing up on here. But Samantha Bee, absolutely brilliant. She's fair and honest and careful. She knows the upsides and the downsides of things too. So she's very impressive to deal with. Tuck Buckford, yes, is the name of Colbert's fake character. Yeah, Tuck Buckford. Yeah, Colbert, he can sing, he can dance, he can act tolerably well. He's also a brilliant intellectual. He's fascinated with a lot of stuff. He's interested in the arts and the sciences. This has been true with a lot of talk show hosts. People forget how bright Steve Allen was. He was not only a songwriter and a comedian, but he really loved science, and he wrote a very scathing criticism. He was a free thinker and anti-creationist in that as well, and did some really wonderful material. I'm trying to know. Jack Parr was quite an intellectual, more political than and cultural than scientific end of things. And Johnny Carson loved astronomy, amateur magician or some semi-professional magician, and also something of a free thinker and skeptic side as well. He would have James Randi on as a guest and Carl Sagan and all of that. So there's a long-term background of things that you find of people who were science geeks in the closet, but were multi-talented in a lot of different ways. No one so far accused Fallon of is being a scientific literate. He's not exactly a sciencey type. He couldn't figure out how far we are from the sun on one of his little skits he did one time, and he's a nice, amiable guy, but boy, I think he needs to study Neil deGrasse Tyson a bit more. Larry Wilmore. I miss Larry Wilmore, Fino. Yeah, the Nightly Show with Larry. He was very example of a black guy that got to host a show, and his show also was very trenchant, and I really was sorry when it got canceled. I think that he deserved better, and I definitely wish him well. That a lot of the people that were associated with the show have continued on to do other things, and I'm keeping my eye out. I'm going to be really pissed off if Wilmore is not back into doing something over the longer term.
All right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and Colbert emphasizing his Catholicism. Yeah, he's not an agnostic. He's a Catholic. You know, I have to classify him as a liberal Catholic, and I think that's a useful measure of things, because if we're thinking that there's got to be a divide between atheists and non-atheists, and not see that it's a way more complex figure in there. I have way more in common with Catholic Colbert with a religious culture camphor. And so that it's not the religion that's the factor, it's other elements that are playing a role. And if you weed out that Tortucan mindset, independent of the religion angle, there are ways that you can defend a religious position that don't violate principles. I don't happen to hold to that because I don't have a God module in my head, I don't think. And I don't have a need of that in my philosophical frame. But there are all sorts of issues about morality and why the universe exists and purpose in life that you can hang on. And if you have the frame and personal experiences that resonate with that, it's going to seem natural for you to do that. And I see much more common cause with a Colbert than I ever would with some of the people that I encounter in the atheist community that are just kind of dig trenches, dogmatic, and start quibbling about whether or not they want to read the agnostics out of the club or not. And I'm going, get a grip. Yes, I know. I'm going on and on and on here. You know, it's I'd love to see the point when we can have one where we can have multiple talking heads, where we have other people on their direct video feeds like we do in the regular scistrike stuff, because I think that's too, as much as I love to hear myself think and to talk, I also like to actually have the voices involved. So having them being able to actually speak rather than me kind of reacting off of the stuff that's in the live feed makes it less of a monologue and more of a genuine conversation.
Agreed. That we should look into changing up the format as we move forward. And also, I was thinking it would be handy to have not debates. I'm not a big fan of debates because nobody goes away thinking anything different than they thought when they came into a debate. It's all, did I win or did I lose? But having people with opposing anti-evolutionists, creationists, whatever, just for a discussion. Have discussion.
Yeah, join the conversation.
Exactly.
And I think it's fair to say that I don't lose my temper with people, ad hominem attack people. In fact, you may have noticed in my Twitter feeds and other areas where I really kind of dig my heels in, even on the use of the word liar. Because boy, I don't think many creationists ever lie. They say things that aren't true, but they say it because they believe them to be true. And so now the issue is not why are they saying that it's not true, it's how did they come to think it was true? Now that's a methods question. And that doesn't involve impugning their mendacity, which I think most of them aren't. That people have a tremendous capacity to believe things that aren't true. And when you look at it from a source methods direction, it becomes obvious how they've done that. They've relied on sources they never bothered to fact check, and they don't have standards for fact checking. Then, hooey.
Indeed.
Yeah, Sam B has found a better minority-focused format. Yeah, she manages to cram a hell of a lot wittily into only what's about 20, 25 minutes when you remove all the commercials. They use visuals extremely well, and her interviews with people. When she went over to Russia to interview that hacker, that was just absolutely fascinating. And it's an astonishing range of people that she can get on the scene on that. And she's fair. She will point out the downsides to their own position, and she's somebody that you can respect intellectually, in addition to the fact that she's hilariously funny. In fact, I'd say I respect her more than, say, a Bill Maher, who is much more of a bomb thrower, superficial in the bomb throwing. I would put him several notches down on the pile compared to somebody like Sam B, who is really.
All right. Oh, Brian, you want to post a link? I'm going to have to mod you. So be good. Don't boot everybody out of the chat. I'm going to mod you so you can post your link. Congratulations, Brian. You're a mod. You may post your link at will. See what happens?
Yeah, here we go. Fact checking is an interesting issue to go through, and Apologia can kind of see stuff because of the thing we just did on the answers in Genesis. Is if you know how to approach a problem from a methods direction, really fact check a lot of stuff rather interestingly. First, you look up the original source, and find out whatever that is. Check to see if it has any source links in it. If it doesn't, that's a red flag that you've got a problem. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's no sources behind it, but it means that that's a difficulty with the secondary source. You try to find out salient points of information that are potentially testable. Do they mention a name of a researcher? Do they mention a particular gene that's been discovered? Do they mention your little hands-on. And then you can do a separate Google search for that. And so now that I'm in the multiple window world of modern internet, I'll then often open up another window, keep my original window open, and now I'm doing some searching for things. The other bit is to look up title. When I'm searching out a technical paper, once I find the paper itself, I Google search to get the full documentation on it, because it may not mention what month it was printed in, for example. And in my bibliography, I always maintain a standard format. But for the title, rather than the website, you then can find out other people who may have mentioned it and listed the same title as well. So you can start finding out follow-ups. In some science context, of course, the hard work gets done for you. I love Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. PNAS. Raise your hand metaphorically if you know about PNAS, and if you don't, for God's sakes, go to PNAS.org and get familiar with it and bookmark the damn thing, because it's your taxpayer money paying for it. It's Proceedings in the National Academy of Sciences. The paper that comes up on there is part of the Highwire referencing system. So if you call up a paper from, say, 2008, when I'm doing background research and I'm going through, whittling through my old unprocessed information, you get the abstract of the paper, but you can see everybody in the Highwire system that has cited it since. And you can therefore follow up on the follow-up work. And not everything is relevant, but I have gotten a lot of new technical information that came up. In fact, I'll give you an example of how useful that can be as a fact-checking thing. I was hunting up a paper on this, I think, cycloidecoidea gene. It's a funny little name gene that I hadn't remembered about. It was a paper on, it's related to the formation of plants and flowers. I looked up in my bibliography, and there was nothing on that gene anywhere in there. So I didn't have that source, and I didn't have anything that related to it yet. So I started going through and pulled up the abstract, got the PDF of the paper, because everything in PNAS is free after a year. And so I stored the PDF and I printed up the abstract of it with all the Highwire sources that were listed. And it went on for like 3 or 4 pages. And there were at least 6, 8, 10 articles in there that were follow-up work to show how this thing had mutated and how gene duplications were involved and how it manifested in flower shapes. And so there was a whole bunch of follow-up work. Some of the sources actually were already in my bibliography that I'd hit from other directions, but a lot wasn't. Well, as I was putting in the 3rd or 4th one into the bibliography, suddenly a doorbell bill in my head went off. And I go, wait a minute, they're not in my bibliography. Michael Denton's anti-evolution book, when I did Slam Dunk, and I tracked down all of his source citations, not just the stuff that I put in Slam Dunk. And therefore, he does a whole thing on plants and flower formation. Sources I have found on this cyclocoidea gene were in my bibliography. They meant they weren't in Denton's bibliography either, because otherwise they'd already be in mine, because I put all of his sources in. So even before I have gotten to reading his section in detail, I already know a big hole in his argument that he doesn't know is there, because he's never bothered to research the material at far enough depth. There's going to be way more on that. But that's how you can use a source fact-checking modality to lead you into new areas. And what you want to do as your goal is to figure out what the landscape of the data are. You have to know everything. But at the very least, you can put up, in effect, mental question marks to where you go, there's an area that's obviously an area people are looking at that I haven't researched well enough yet, so I'm going to put a little question mark in my brain, in my memory palace, to realize that I may want to investigate that later, or if I get into a discussion with somebody on it, I know it's a potential minefield because I don't know enough about that to be able to address it properly. And so it's a constant push back and pull back on things on that. So I hope that makes a little bit of a sense of how the methodology works. It's an on-site tool you use. You do it by doing it. And eventually you kind of get the hang more and more and more of it. You kind of can smell out things that are suspicious, where you go, wow, I can't find a primary source on that one. That's maybe less than meets the eye. If it's an old work and nobody's done work on it since, if a paper pops out and there's absolutely no references to it, nobody has cited it anywhere, boy, you just got a thud on that one, and that can put it into perspective. The very opening stage with the stuff that I did with Paralogia, as he'll have seen in my comments, is that they never bothered to get to step 1. They don't bother to read the primary sources. It never even occurs to them to look. Mouse click. It's that fast. It only took me, maybe about 2 hours to pin down the primary source material. And then it took me much longer to actually do the little mini vids that I did that I sent off to Paul. Is Paul still online there? Maybe he can jump in and make a comment on it.
We'll see. He's got about 6 minutes.
On the cuneiform slam dunk. Yeah, I'd love to see slam bunk and cuneiform. Cuneiform is really fascinating because it started out counting tool. So writing in Babylonia was, how do you tell, do you own the cow and how many seeds are in the pot? And only later does it take on other aspects, and it began to be used in the religion aspect in terms of their astrological calculations. Most of what are divisions of the year into 360 or 365 days and weeks and how many things. They used a base, yeah, I think it was a base 6. And that's why they got 360 degrees and all that kind of stuff. That works out very effectively. Decimal has one big problem, and you can't divide by 3 easily. You get these 0.33333 stuff. Whereas the base system that they were using, you could divide base 12. That was what they were using, base 12. You could divide by 2, 3, and 4. So it's very practical for kind of practical mathematics-y things in a way the decimal system wasn't. But those damn French, with their insistence on tens, and because we got 10 fingers, it's not divisible by 3. And it can lead you to irrational numbers in a hurry, which is fine. That leads you off into a lot of fun little areas, but it's not necessarily handy. That's why a yardstick is still handy for certain kind of measurements in a way that a meter stick isn't, because you can't divide it evenly by 3.
All right. On that note, now that we've had RJ's evolution 2 hours, which
well, I hope I haven't bored anybody.
I don't think so. Looking at the graph, it does not appear you have, and I'm glad we did. It was interesting all the way through.
By all means, if anybody wants to dump a question on me, they can do it at the tortucan.wordpress.com website. Just go there, click, put a thing on. As I said, as long as I got electric power on here to be able to get online and check on it, I check the website every day, and I will indeed pay attention to it. I can comment on it directly there, or I can make it a subject matter for a later video to do, or a thing here. That's that way we can explore together. Pick my brain.
Indeed. And and once again for RJ's song, email your suggestions or recommendations to scistrike at sciencestrikeforce.com. And
preferably copyright free.
well, you see, it doesn't have to be copyright free. If you use Google's tool, it'll tell you, say you just type in their search thing on their page, their sound library. They have a blank there where you can check the copyright status of any song. You just type in the title. And just as an experiment, I put in Carry On My Wayward Son, popular song, good one to use. I'm like, nah, this can't possibly work. As it turns out, you're free to use it. You're
well, there you go. Okay, well, I will leave that to your expertise. Yeah. Fino is quite right. You can't divide imperial measurements easily by 10. And that's one of the reasons why decimal became the science instrument. It was really handy to do for sciencey stuff. And so centigrade is much more convenient when you're dealing with chemistry. Fahrenheit makes more sense if you're dealing with human beings and whether or not the day is hot or cold. So it's a matter of which scale you're dealing with. From a science point of view, yeah, decimal was really, really handy, and it worked out. It makes it very easy to do powers and all that kind of stuff. Needless to say, the big loser here is Roman numerals. Anybody ever tried to do long division with Roman numerals? I don't recommend it. And integral calculus with Roman numerals. Oh, I think steam comes out of your ear like that immediately. And so it's no coincidence that's how by borrowing our number system from the Arabs on that decimal modality allowed us to play around with things. And the great invention, which the Arabs came up independently, Hindus and Arabs came up independently from the Maya, which was the idea of 0. And once you have a 0 in play, wow, you can do all sorts of really fun stuff. Plus, you can get into trouble when you try to divide by 0, but that's another matter. And that's essentially what Zeno was trying to do when he's trying to add up infinitely small things together. And there you need calculus. In fact, that whole bit about how we do mathematics and whether mathematics is something that's true, independent of us, or it's something we just invent, is still something that's as big a debate in the philosophical community as free will. And you still get philosophers that are practically throwing poo piles at each other over it, where you're going, for my prejudice, I'm a bit of a Platonist. Say that for me, the universe is what mathematics does for a living. That everything in mathematics, in effect, is seen in the universe somewhere, and all of the universe ultimately is a reflection of mathematical relationships. I can't prove it, but I suspect it's so. And I suspect that universes can't avoid doing that. It's just that's what it is.
Night,
Reason
Tao.
why e to the pi power plus 1 equals 0. Oh, I don't know who Adam Wright is, but if he sounds, it could very well be. Very few ideas are original to anybody. That everybody has thought about everything else. When I read William James for the first time, and here he is writing stuff in the 1860s and 70s, and I'm going, holy moly, this guy is bright. He is just really sharp. And how much farther would he have gone if he had 20th century science under his belt rather than trying to play off of 19th century? Boy, that guy is brilliant. And I admire the guy enormously. Got a few things wrong. He was more prone to psychical research than we would be today, but nevertheless, he's on things on animal cognition and philosophical issues. The will to believe, really deep philosophy stuff, and is really relevant on that whole notion. I allude to it in the nomady, the non-overlapping magisterium argument that comes in there. So I'm a great admirer of William James.
Oh, look, it's good that we ran long today. Michelle, if you see in the chat, apparently Michelle's been listening to you for quite a while.
Yes, I see Michelle. Yes, indeed. Hello, Michelle.
I'm glad we ran long.
Yeah, it's no one can ever accuse me of being a shy wallflower. And Cy can attest to the fact that often when the other shows have ended, our regular scistrike thing, we one time went to way too late from your end about how we were into the wee hours, but we just got talking about stuff from motorcycles to your dad's military experience and all the history and stuff that we were just bouncing back and forth on, and it was a delightful conversation, I think.
Indeed. Well, once you get going on an interesting topic, it's hard to just throw the brakes on, isn't it?
Yeah. I guess if anyone wonders how the hell I can remember all this crap, it's because I, in effect, realized that my mind was creating a memory palace. And so I don't remember trivia. None of this is just disconnected stuff. It's stuff that relates to other stuff that relates to other stuff that relates to other stuff. And so that's why it's so easy for me to kind of go off on a digression that leads to this, that leads to that, because I'm basically working my way through the trail of connections. And it's very difficult for me to suddenly just turn the brain off and pull the stops on things. And to some extent, I find that some of the people in the regular science community are able to kind of pull the plugs too soon. They don't follow up on stuff, especially outside of their own disciplines.
All righty. Well, shall we kill it at 2 hours, Chief?
As you wish, sir. I can just ruddle on. I'm just amazed at the fact that we can do this sort of thing. That this was the kind of thing that was just a fantasy world back in the 1960s, to imagine that we could have this kind of face-to-face instantaneous communication, that there could be people literally all over the planet in different time zones, in different cultures, that can communicate instantaneously, same room. I mean, wow, that's absolutely amazing. So it's our duty that's really true, and to be honest and try to defend things that are true, as opposed to Jeranism or the things that are using the same tools we are, but in service of dangerous twaddle and silliness and stuff that can screw people's lives up and cause them to make bad decisions and maybe blow up the world if the worst things happen. And so this game that's both exhilarating and dangerous.
Agreed. And I wonder if did I forget to mention this? I don't remember. Did the Patreon thing? Did I say something about that earlier?
Gee whiz, he said disingenuously. Please, I do plead with you as an impoverished person trying to make sure that I can still pay my electric bill, which is literally uncertain at this moment. Everybody who can be a Patreon, especially if you can do it on a regular basis. I'm sounding like the NPR Pledge Week here. But if you can come in and do that sort of thing, I don't want anybody to sell their house to finance tip. I don't want anybody to forego giving the dog food or anything else. A little bit of spare cash or something where you were deciding whether or not you were going to buy that new T-shirt that had Darwin on it or not, or some other thing, or the latest movie. Maybe you could support Patreon or the GoFundMe, which is another venue on there. It's all volunteer supported things that we're doing. If you can see becoming more of an active person in terms of helping build this network of people whose expertise can link together. Boy, we've got so many people all around the world who can react to things. And I'm amazed at how much isn't getting done in a world where we should be able to be doing that. I'm struck by how few people are pushing back against creationists at the high level. I mean, yeah, we've got a lot of people who will be for somebody who has like 5 followers, who is some poor little Christian activist, heaven knows somewhere, and they prattle on about why are there still monkeys. But they're not the critical ones. If you look at somebody who is a critical one, Ken Ham, Ray Comfort, the people at the Discovery Institute, and in terms of influence, people like Alex Jones and all of that, that's one where everybody needs to do more pushback to where he says something which you know by your own research and expertise isn't true. The network needs to know about that, and they need to be pushed back on it. I've tried to start doing that with the people on the Discovery Institute and Ken Ham and all the others, and scistrike has been watching me do that. I'm sure I've been pushing back on these things, that when anybody says something that's, especially if it's something that's making a fact claim, push back.
Indeed.
And in some cases, we'll make a point of bringing up technical literature that pushes back. I do that with Hugh Ross because he plays the techno geek game. And he's been doing that less and less and less. Off so much that I thought he blocked me, because that would account for why I wasn't seeing his tweets. But it turns out, nope, he wasn't blocking me. He was just not doing that so much.
You ran him off.
Maybe it's because, oh boy, I was just about to click to that wonderful paper in Nature about this thing that's so beautifully designed, except that damn Downard guy is going to pounce on me and cite something about its evolutionary history, isn't he?
It's been known to happen. It's not a completely unreasonable fear. And howdy, Richard. Just a load of fun as usual. All right. Geez, I hope I didn't accidentally leave your plug up.
All we're seeing is my damn Patreon.com.
Oh, did I forget?
Yeah,
to leave that
I
up?
can't see the comments popping up on there.
Geez, it's almost as if I'm
As
emphasizing.
much as I want everybody. I know I'm really new at this game. I've got as an old fart that comes from the era of dial telephones, to be making use of these new technologies. I've tried to master Twitter. I've tried to figure out how to do all the things. Boy, Tsai was leading me like a poor child through the thing as to how to adjust my videos to put the links in and the things to go to the next bit and all that kind of stuff. And so it's all very, very new to me on this. Technologies that I don't feel afeared of in terms of that. The ability to communicate by video, the ability to transmit information. The wonderful thing is that, that I can literally go over and produce an electronic link, buddy, to click on it with a mouse and suddenly be brought to a technical paper. Wow, the amazing things that we can do with just an instantaneous thing. This is way beyond telegraphy, which was the internet of its era. And we can make use of all this stuff because we got so much stuff available. Primary source material that we can either use to criticize or to use as our own ammunition. Oh, Friday, Paleogia will upload something he and RJ did together. Yeah, cosmology, cosmic background. Time on that one. I gave him a lot of material that he can play around with. I'm sure he'll edit the vast majority of it out to try to get the little pithy nuggets. Quite pleased with what was going on. And it was a simple matter of following up on what AIG had written, and they were screwing up, how they were missing their own argument. because they don't think through their own argument very well. And so there's some areas that you would think they are favorable to their side that they don't realize they've just stepped into a big pile of doo-doo. And it's the obligation of people like me and others to point that out, to go, here's the difficulty that you're in. And it's not going to change their mind. That's not the purpose of the interaction. The pushback is not to change Tortugan's minds. They don't change their minds. The object is that anybody observing it, anybody viewing the video secondarily, if they've got an open mind, may have that little spark. It may be just the ammunition they need or just the step they need that pushes them to the point of where they start doing their own investigations and move off on their own way and then join in the big synergistic network to where everybody can connect up with everybody else. I try to follow every scientist I encounter on Twitter that's in my reference bibliography, especially ones that are in cutting edge research. Bing, I follow them because they're doing homework for me. I get to see upcoming technical papers right from the horse's mouth. Oh, RJ, I'm in my 30s. Even I feel left behind by these new ways of communication. Oh boy. Once you get past the modality of it, everybody types, everybody plays around. You've got mouses, you've got keys, you've got different things you click. You either have drag or drop or not. I don't know every little ins and outs of spreadsheets. I've done a few PowerPoints now and then. But once I get past the technique, then I want to make the most of it. And the importance is the content. And if all I'm ever doing is just simply blither blathering for 20 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, then it's worthless. If I'm conveying how the method works, how you apply things to reason to be able to make yourself a more informed person, how you deal with people in an honest and not insulting way, but still firm, that when somebody has cranial blockage of the rectum and is saying stupid, dangerous stuff, it's your duty to point that out. In that case, yeah, all of these tools can be fabulously useful. As people get more and more things, the one area I suppose I'm at the least is that I don't have a laptop. I've got a PC. So a lot of the things that may be relatively easy for me to do at a PC level where I got a big screen, somebody on their little touch screen iPad is going to be in a mess. That's why PDFs are a terrible thing. And if I can ever get to the point where I have enough money to be able to actually do a real live, more professional website, I would love to be able to find a way to integrate all the material that's at tortugan.com in such a way that it becomes as user-friendly as possible for the iPhone set, and then kind of have the larger website as the more traditional download material and linkages kind of thing. And then eventually have linkages to videos and all that other stuff. But that's way down the road after I get past trying to make ends meet to make sure that the electric bill is on tomorrow.
All righty. On that note,
Lord, we're at 2 hours and 12 minutes. You know how time flies.
It certainly does. And every time we've started a show, I keep, for each one of these evolution hours, have I not asked you beforehand, geez, you think we have enough material? You think we have enough to go a full hour? And I don't remember us coming up short. So,
well, in fact, you know, when we started this up, I was thinking, well, we didn't actually have a topic so I could discuss the reptile-mammal transition. But it turned out enough questions and comments were coming in off of the live stream that covered everything just fine and dandy right there. Aaron Raw, I have to say, boy, you may not want to have me in the same room with Aaron Raw. He's a bright, articulate guy, but he has his limitations. Some of his stuff, he's tried to make some of the creationism issue, unfortunately, too much merely a religion issue from a methods direction. And coming at it from the bottom up, almost a peripheral content detail. It's not telling you the deep-seated reasons why they're managing to screw up the way they do. You have to pay attention to context, but if you're missing the bottom up, and I'm not sure Aaron has really gotten quite into that area. I think he'd be probably a little different attitude than I have about the issues about the provability or disprovability of religion. And as an atheist, I have an opinion on that, but it's more complicated, I think. So we might have some surprisingly testy conversations, Aaron Raw and I, if we were ever to do something like that. So be warned.
Well, it would be interesting to see how it turned out, though. That's all right.
Yeah, yeah. But
That's
there was a lecture that he did at, I think it was American Atheists, just a little while ago. I think it was either this year or last year, and I watched a bit on that, the whole show that he was doing, and I felt that the way that he was approaching the creation religion issue and the notions of provability, that he could basically disprove certain things that were actually kind of big landmines. I get into the same problem with Richard Carrier, who is a very bright guy. I met him at a presentation that he did at Darwin on the Palooza a year or two ago. I think he overpresses his case at certain points. And I come from the historical level where there's a lot of issues in history that are difficult to pin down, that you have documents that are written long after the fact, and yet if you're trying to argue means that the original thing didn't exist, you're flushing an awful lot of stuff down the drain. And if you can do the argument without having to go in those directions, I think it's easier. I've advised people, for example, to steer clear of the there's no proof Jesus existed argument. There's also no proof that Alexander the Great ever lived. All the stuff on him is centuries after the fact, too. But yet, boy, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody who doubts there really was an Alexander and draws on a lot of these long after-the-fact sources to derive that. A lot of the scuttlebutt we get about the Roman emperors comes from only a few sources, usually written long after the fact. And so how much of it was actually true? Instead, question, you can pull the rug out from under Christianity without ever having to worry about when Jesus existed, or did he, by asking just a source question. So my favorite one is, in what year was Jesus born? You ask that question, you are setting up a train wreck between the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. Sources in Scripture on this for, because they both blatantly disagree. And you can have the train wreck and watch all the pieces fly, and you never have to come in on whether or not there was actually a Jesus person behind it all. Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. It doesn't make the train wreck go away. So why pick a fight on an area that's a minefield when you got a train wreck ready to rip just by asking the right question?
That's mean. All right.
Well, yes, scholarship is a contact sport, Cy. You know, it's a vicious little area. And this, if you've ever actually read, even mathematicians, you want to think that there's a field where you would never find ego? Holy smokes! You read the back and forth going on between mathematicians on higher level stuff, and some of the snarking that they'll go into about people complaining about material. And in the historical fields as well, when you have different ideological camps on things, this was far more prevalent really in the 19th century. They would go after it tooth and tongue on things. So none of these supposedly rarefied scholarly areas interest. The only thing that happens is as the time goes on, all the people who were pitchforking each other have dropped dead. And the new generation comes along that no longer has a commitment to fighting the same battles, and they can just start looking at the data more dispassionately. How did any of the Phemo? Yes, Herod died before 4 BC, and Quirinius did not get the job in Syria before the latter. Yes, there really was a Quirinius who was governor of Syria around 6 AD, at the time when the census would theoretically have been taken when Israel was annexed to the Roman Empire. And that's the Luke version. Matthew, meanwhile, born during the reign of King Herod, and we know that he died in 4 BC, thereabouts, because of this eclipse, which was calculated at the time when the King James Bible was being written. That's why Bishop Ussher has that 4004 date for the creation. He pushed the date back from 4000 to 4004 to accommodate the fact that King Herod had been pushed back a few years. But the problem is it means shredding Luke. And there's a good case to be made that Luke is probably more correct on this point, because Robin Lane Fox, in his book on Christianity, British historian, says that Josephus' evidence would suggest that John the Baptist died around 35 AD, and Jesus would then be crucified in the year after that, 36, and that would make him 30 years old, born in the year 6. That would make it in tune with the Quirinius census time. So Luke may have got the data right. But that means you've just shredded Matthew. So that means one of the Gospels is really head up your ass wrong. Not only that, Matthew and Luke are the only sources for the Davidic ancestry of Joseph. And that's a necessity under the whole model of the Messiah, where the Messiah has to be born in David's city of Bethlehem, and he has to be descended from King David. Well, Matthew and Luke are the ones that are trying to supply Jesus's Davidic credentials, and they disagree completely on which son of David, all the way down to who's the father of Joseph. And the conservative Christians wriggle around this by simply editing the book of Luke, where they pencil in Mary's name as the actual target of the genealogy. So it's now Mary's genealogy. Well, who the hell gave conservatives the right to rewrite the New Testament? I thought that was not allowed. Opening up that can of worms about Matthew and Luke with the dating of when Jesus was born, you have a train wreck that just blows everything to smithereens. By the way, stuff in because the Bible tells me so at my bloody little website, so anybody can get that. Just go to the stupid web. I'll type in the thing again so everybody doesn't miss it.
Never a bad idea.
And you can go over there to the old tip, and that's because the Bible tells me so, which is chapter 6. Download the PDF, download the references. That's in a separate file. Have fun with it, because it goes into all that material, and a bunch of Bible scholars who just scratch their heads over this stuff, or people like Lee Strobel. How many of you have heard of Lee Strobel? He's a current Bible apologist. I follow him on Twitter. He's done a big video and stuff on why Christianity and the case for Jesus and all that. Around to covering the when Jesus was born stuff, he basically didn't think about it. He's listening to some people who think he was born in the Herod days and others who think he's born afterwards. And so he's got different people who disagree about when Jesus was crucified. And because he never compares notes, he's not recognizing the flaws in his source base. A lot of Bible apologists just don't do that because they're Tortukans and they just compartmentalize stuff. You got an awful lot of that. You got the liberal rationalizers, the stuff, or scratch their heads and go, oh, that's a mystery. I don't know the cause of that. No. No, it's not a mystery. One of them is wrong, at least. That's an internal contradiction. Or the literalists who say, nope, there can be no contradictions. And like the Krell machine in Forbidden Planet, they'll just supply as much energy as they need to just contort and shave and pencil in and revise like mad to make sure that everything contradictory. So they'll talk about seeming contradictions. And each one of them are rationalizers. They're just rationalizers in a little different way. So we got off on that. But yeah, I strongly recommend it. I've done a lot of homework on these topics. So just between chapter 5 and chapter 6, which in of themselves are book length, they'll have a ton of material in there on a lot of different fields of the subjects that we just touched on in here. And then they can follow up. There's a lot of stuff that's been done since. Bart Ehrman's books, any of his stuff on the early Christianity and how all of the different heretic cults finally got suppressed and all of that, lost Christianities, that's all relevant material. That anybody that can look at that mass, Christianity is a nice, neat, self-consistent system. Boy, they just really are clueless. And don't let them vote. And don't let them be in public office. Unfortunately, we've already let that barn door open. So we're seeing the Planet that I absolutely adore. Forbidden Planet. It's was the one fiction film that MGM did. They pulled out the stops on it. They did it in stereophonic sound and CinemaScope and all of that. That's where Robbie the Robot came from. It's basically a science fiction retelling of Shakespeare's The Tempest, and it's got a wonderful cast. Very early and it just iridescently beautiful. Yikes! The girl that plays Altera in it. And the guy that designed the spaceships and the robot was the guy that then later on, he was a Japanese industrial designer that worked at MGM, and then he helped at Fox to design all the stuff for Irwin Allen's Lost in Space. And that's why the robot in Lost in Space and the spaceship has a certain resemblance to what you were seeing in Forbidden Planet, because he's designed by the same guy. Oh, good heavens. We've got another 15 or 20 minutes. You see what happens when you let me go and put in your dime?
I've told you before, both publicly and privately, letting you go, it doesn't take much effort to do so. Although I often feel dumber while you're going on, I always feel smarter after we've finished. So if you're expecting me to cut you off, I may not be the best person to do that. Oh, here's what one thing
I'm
you.
cursed with curiosity.
I'm
I'm
sure.
cursed with curiosity.
I'm sure everyone's aware of it. You put up the tortugan.wordpress.com. You put up the website and all that. I'm sure folks are aware of it, but it does bear mentioning that um, there's a reason I keep directing everybody to Patreon for the ongoing stuff and to the GoFundMe for RJ's immediate needs and that kind of thing. Is that uh, I've mentioned to you guys a lot of times. All this information is always made available to all of us to use as we see fit for free, and I think it bears mentioning that when you said, "Oh, go to this website, you can download whatever you want," no paywall, no subscription. It's here it
No
is.
advertisements. Yes,
Yeah,
I hate things like that. No stupid clickbaits popping up.
yeah.
Yeah, Pheno's putting up some very nice information on the chronology matters in here. That Paul's letters are really an interesting case because some of them apparently are genuine and probably by Paul, but an awful lot of the Pauline letters are strongly suspected to be later texts that, and they show an enormous evolution of things. The somewhat misogynistic Paul is apparently the later Paul. That the earlier actual Paul person was apparently not such a son of a bitch that we get later on. And Krosnan did a really exhilarating lecture. He appeared for the very first time at Gonzaga University here, which is a Jesuit college, and it always kind of steered clear of him because he was a little bit too liberal. But it was a very exhilarating thing. And although he's still a devout Catholic, the points he was making about the Pauline letters was very, very interesting. Now, in terms of the other Gospels, the ones that are the relevant ones in terms of a lot of theology, the usual modern view is that Mark is the first gospel, and then Matthew, and Luke by definition is a redaction because he's a disciple of Peter and he's following and pulling together material. And it's interesting to see the stuff that's in typically a lot of the big take-home points are in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're almost identical, except occasionally if there's variation, it'll be the variation in Luke. So whatever sources Luke was drawing on, and we don't know exactly what they were because he never tells us, and we don't have primary sources to look at, so that it's hard to tell. It shows that there had already been a little bit of an evolution on this. The reason why the scholars tended to regard Matthew as not so early is because there are apparently some references in grammatical structures and historical allusions that suggest that it's actually not one of the earliest gospels, and it's also theologically much more picking up on the idea of Jesus as being killed by the Jews, and there's anti-Semitism elements and stuff that are apparently coming in later on in the early church that suggest that Matthew is not as early as it's purporting to be. For my purposes, in Paradise chapter, I don't have to take a stand on that. I try to avoid that. So the documentary hypothesis and all that is interesting, and I allude to it, but instead I can take the Bible straight up, King James Version, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It still falls apart. So if you can give them their assumptions and still have it collapse, then you don't have to worry about it. You don't need to pick a fight as to whether Matthew was earlier than Luke or not.
Oh, and Nim, when you say "what about Q," that scrolled off the screen already.
Yeah, that's
I
related
assume.
to that documentary hypothesis. Again, I allude to a lot of the sources. You'll have to find it buried in the footnotes on there. The Q document concept. It's very probable all the primary sources available, we would find proto sources that are that. If you're familiar with the Jesus seminar, they were trying to do a lot of this stuff of figuring out what was the actual Jesus statements and what was not, and what was interpolation, and they used color codings and all that. It's the same sort of thing Thomas Jefferson did in his Bible, except he was a one-man band and they had a committee. But to my mind, it's an interesting intellectual enterprise. We get into the same thing in relation to Genesis to try to pair out the priestly versions versus the Yahwehist versions, and I go into all of that stuff in the, I think mainly in the Dinomania chapter, which is on flood geology, because it goes into Noah's Ark and all that, and that pops up in that area. So there now, one more. You got chapter 3, chapter 5, and chapter 6 of TIP that you need to download to answer these little Bible questions all there. So now you've got the equivalent of 3 books worth of stuff on your plate.
Check out Paul's comment
Yeah,
before
worth
it scrolls off.
Yeah.
Do you see Paul's comment?
What part of hour don't you people understand? Good grief. Yeah, well, see, I'm in a time dilation universe. You see, I'm actually moving close to the speed of light here. And my Lorentz contraction equation is already squishing. That's why what you take to be merely squibs on the thing is the fact that I'm moving at relativistic speeds. In which case, I've already seen the future, and it's a Trump second term. Run for your lives to Alpha Centauri.
even if it doesn't support life.
Yeah, it'll be an improvement over Trump. Don't worry, under a second Trump term, there won't be any life on Earth either, I suspect. Yeah, it's really fun too. On a weird aside issue, I think it occurred early enough that it's actually in the tip book, but they apparently have a good reason to have found Luke's body. A little monastery, I think in Greece or Serbia or somewhere, that always claimed that they had the remains of Saint Luke. And they did some DNA haplotype analysis on the thing and determined that the person was in fact the right time and place, age and the like, and it had a perfect connection, so that it was probably from the Levant region and all of that. And it was a paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So the same sort of forensic information that we can use on Ötzi the Iceman, we can use to give at least a prima facie case that that stupid little church that claimed they got the stuff taken from Constantinople at the time, I think when it fell to the Turks, I think something like that, they probably were right. That could indeed be the body of Luke. They could actually be right. So science can, in some cases, corroborate some aspects of the history case. And I don't have to dig my heels in on it because goody gumdrops, they got the body of Luke. Contradictions between the Gospel of Luke and Matthew go away. That train wreck still happens in cinemascope and stereophonic sound, independent of who's buried in that monastery.
All right, it's been RJ's Evolution 2.5 hours. let's wrap it up, Chief. And
okay.
We'll be.
If my power is still on next week, or you'll find out first if my power is still on by Friday, because I'll show up for the other thing. Yeah, it's a cross-finger moment whether or not a Vista's coming, because although there have been I thank you for your donations in there. Cy, you've been greatly helpful on this, but I'm still a long, long way to go before I'm in a place where I'm not having worries at night.
Everybody does what they can, and there's a lot of us. A lot of us helping. It'll be easy for everybody. Many hands makes work light. Anyway, alrighty. So
yeah.
What was I had something.
Fino, I was about ready to bring up Ötzi. Fino was bringing that up. That's fascinating. That's a big problem for young Earth creationism, because you have to explain why it's so well preserved, but no dinosaur is.
I don't tease the poor white.
If everything is only 4,500 years old, why don't we find more examples of, especially if everything was really rapidly buried? Forensic part, what do they got to do? That was a thing, in fact, that I brought up with the Paleogia. One of the things that came up with the AIG thing that I did for him, they were alluding to stuff about the soft tissue that's been found, and that this was the indication, they found blood vessels and all of this in still springy tissues. Yeah, super duper microscopy things that you need a super duper microscope to see. This is not Ötzi the Iceman here. We don't have any super Tyrannosaurus Rex with all the little muscles still attached to the arms. Sorry. And you'd have to ask, why not? This gigantic flood that was sloshing down so fast that it can bury everything so quickly? But little bones and fragments of stuff most of the time. That leads to the whole issue about fossil graveyards. It's a phrase that doesn't pop up nearly as often today, but it was really popular in creationist apologetics in the 60s and 70s. But this still gets used functionally. They think that there's fossils are just masses of fossils in big elaborate fossil beds that were all laid down all at once. But as any paleontologist knows, gosh, we wish that were true, that most of the time everything is just disarticulated stuff. And when they do find one of these rare fossil beds that's got a lot of stuff in a relatively constrained frame where a bunch of animals got killed relatively quickly from some flash flood, for example, they practically break out the champagne because it's a gold mine of information, but it's really, really rare. And most of the time they're walking around in the middle of nowhere, hoping that somebody doesn't shoot at them, either super cold or super dry or super hot. Mongolia and deserts and stuff to dig stuff up off or pick up crap off of the open exposures. Wow,
Yeah.
they'd love to have more fossil graveyards.
Yeah, and it should be the norm. That should be. I mean,
Yeah,
their whole line of thinking predicts that would be the norm.
and
Anyway.
worse than that, ubiquitous. That's one of the reasons why I want the standard question for flood geology people when they start bringing up, oh, the Grand Canyon and all the rest. I go, please describe the flood layer where you live. Probably seen me on Twitter ask that question, some of these people. I say, wait a minute, I live in Spokane. There ain't no flood layer here. Where is it where you live? If it's a global flood, you shouldn't have to go to the Grand Canyon or the Lewis Overthrust or some other oddball site. You should be able to walk outside everywhere. Well, they don't think they need to do that. It literally doesn't occur to them to look down to their own feet. History of Kentucky, where Ken Ham's museums are, and it ain't flood deposit, and he's never going to get within 100 miles of looking at any of the technical papers on the subject.
Indeed. He knows it's there, too.
Yeah, so any of those wanting to study that flood matter, that would be chapter 3. It's about dinosaurs, because that was an area where young Earth creationists are about the only ones who pay a teensy-weensy attention to dinosaurs. Intelligent designers don't think a minute about it. They could care less because they don't have to book the stall plan on Noah's Ark and the like. And they don't have to complain about the chronology part. So a lot of the motivations that young Earth creationists have to go after dinosaurs don't apply to intelligent designers. But the thing is, bit of that evidence is just not making sense from a creationist point of view and not from a flood geology point of view. So in that chapter, I go into biogeography, animal distribution. This image that we have of all the little Australian marsupials on a junket ticket from Mount Ararat all the way back to Australia. They got to make sure that they all get together as a group because all of their fossils are in Australia. No, none of that works out well. And Dwayne Gish don't look at all pretty when he starts to try to deal with Tenrex and all the cute little critters down there, even in sources that he cited. I've obtained a great deal more information on the subject since I wrote that material about 12 years ago, but it still kicks butt.
All righty, let's wrap it up, Chief.
Is this about the 8th time you've said that?
I know, but then you start saying interesting stuff, and I don't think anybody in the chat will disagree. You and your damn interesting stuff.
Yeah.
All right. That's
the Grand Canyon is the wonderful poster child, and that's why everybody needs to be aware of their source base on this. It's not a huge bunch of people. If you're talking Grand Canyon, you're talking Steve Austin and Andrew Snelling, Ward and Wood Marap, and a few others have dealt with the things. But Austin and Snelling are their point people on this, and they're the ones that are presenting the primary source case. They've got technical material in their Answers Research Journal and all of that. And to the extent that you are geologically trained, for heaven's sakes, weigh in on it. I'm trying to build up a data set on that point. In fact, at our Free Thought Society meeting, that's things where I got home rather late today and power was still on. We had a wonderful lecture by Andy Boodington, who is a geologist at one of our community colleges here and part of our Geological Society. And he was doing a wonderful geological primer on old rocks found on very high places and why creationists are wrong on them. And it was an excellent piece. And we've got an awful lot of wonderful geological people here at the community that do these things. And I attend stuff that they have material on the Missoula floods. A lot of the researchers that are in that area are living in here because this is the place that they look at it. And none of that stuff makes sense from a flood geology point of view. The creationists have to detail with all of the little fiddly bit stuff. And the Grand Canyon, a big ditch, it's a set of layerings of time, and fossils are occurring in particular sequences, and there are little deposits that you just can't explain in fast water flow, and then you have to figure out, as scistrike knows from the thing that we did earlier on the other video, how does it turn into rock so fast so that the canyon can form? They never even think to explain that. But, oh, that was another thing that I don't know whether or not it made it into the, some of the files were too big that I'd send to Paul, and I may or may not have hit it, but one of the things where they made the mistake flurrying, oh yes, it was about the barrier reef on that Answers in Genesis show, and they were talking about the fact that the climate change, this was propaganda for climate change, when they were talking about the barrier reef supposedly dying, and they were saying that God is providential and he's going to be looking into all this stuff. And I couldn't resist pointing out, you know, you don't want to bring up coral reefs, because you know who figured out how coral reefs form? That was Charles Darwin. He was the first one to figure out how the sinking atolls are the formations of coral reefs. And ironically, creationist was referring to how coral reefs were forming, not realizing that it wasn't a creationist who figured that out. It was Charles Darwin, the evolutionist geologist.
Boy, it looks like Paul's had a big glass of wise
Yeah,
ass tonight.
Oh, anyone who's asking me questions, I was away for most of the show. I'll rewatch it. Yeah, well, it's how hopefully Paul is coming along with the construction of the little show that we did, and I'm curious to see how well that works out. I hope you got some good nuggets from it. So the lesson on that is, don't let a creationist slip an assumption or a source under your nose unchallenged. That they too many times in God discussions, it pops up right away when they'll say, well, how do you disprove God? Well, which God did you have in mind? Only their God gets to play. That the moment you let that assumption on the field, William Lane Craig is prone to that kind of reasoning, and so is Dinesh D'Souza or anybody else. They just assume that only their side gets to play here. But sorry, can't we get Vishnu on board? Can't we get the Shinto gods? Can't we get the Native American Sky Father and Mother Earth and all that on the field? Or is it just your little coddled snowflake religion that gets to be the only one that gets to have God? You're not even a majority of the planet, Christianity. You're a lot. Lump every Christian together and you got 2.6 billion people, but that means there are 4.4 billion non-Christians. The last time I heard, that's a minority. And that's assuming you can lump everybody together. Would you like to take some of the extreme evangelical Christians who do not think the Roman Catholics are anything other than the whore of Babylon in the coming end times? So frankly, you got to lop 1 billion or 1.5 billion people off the list. And suddenly the Christianity God argument starts looking smaller and smaller and smaller. You can whittle it down to be the size of Vishnu here if you work at it. Oh, he says he'll be posting it on Friday. Okay, yeah, that's wasn't that CD technically a creationist when he started out his research? Oh, yes, I don't know who at CD was. That's not at all impossible. There's a lot of backsliders on that point.
CD,
Michael Shermer went through a bit of a creationist phase.
Charles Darwin.
So who are they talking about?
Charles Darwin.
Oh, Charles Darwin. Oh no, he was never terribly religious. He wasn't a super duper churchgoer. He moved from a kind of a squishy generic religion to being very skeptical. And then when his daughter died, by that time he was really concerned. And parasitical organisms, you know, when he looked at all that, he was going, yipes. But when his daughter died under very horrible conditions, and in part he was a bit responsible for it because of the treatment that had been done or not done. And I think there was a little bit of guilt there, but he must have felt that it was way easier to believe in no God at all than to think that a God could exist that would have allowed his daughter to die the way she did. I think the only really big thing you missed, Fino, was RJ early on asking if you could explain your collaboration. Yeah, what was that Paul sent me the link to the June 8th Answers in Genesis, Answers in the News show. and also the link to all of the sources that they were citing, that they were going to be discussing. And I said, that'll do. So I first looked at the sources before I watched the video, like 33 minutes long or so. And so I constructed my data field first. You look at the video. I think that makes a much more powerful argument, because when you know where the source material is connected up, then you know where the field is, and then you can look at how they're dancing around it or not. So all of my comments that I sent to Paul were related to my stuff that I had worked out in the followed up the source material. And it took me longer to do the commentaries than it did to actually find the source material. Research is way faster than presentation. That's why videos can be a pain, because they have relatively low information content, unless you're having like mini windows popping up with sources that you can link on, which we don't really do yet. And so even if you look at the talking head that I've been for the last, yipes, 2 hours and 45 minutes, there's been a relatively small amount of technical material that I have alluded to along the way. And that's from an information content point of view, my point of view. But what else can you do? Mea culpa, mea culpa.
Alrighty.
I got a section on Darwin's religion. I think it's in tip 1.4 of the websites.
Also free.
It'll be in PDF format in the main site, and it's on Charles Darwin's theory, and going into that, and also in tip 1.5, which is on dissing Darwin, the next segment. And because you have an issue. Alfred Wallace, by contrast, started out at age 16. He gave up on the Bible after he read Tom Paine's Age of Reason, and then he stayed a non-Christian for the rest of his life. But because of his sister's connection to spiritualism, he adopted spiritualism in his 20s. And he got really deep into that, and he eventually came up with a thing that the intelligent designers of all people have tried to co-opt about his notions of mind and intelligence to guiding nature. Excuse me, it's not the Christian mind he's talking about, it's spiritualism. And he's kind of a sad, strange character in many ways, because he was often very credulous on a lot of things. A bright guy, but often very quirky. He got in a lawsuit with a flat earther. Hear that, Jeranism? And he finally won, but he never got any money off of it, because the legal fees were so enormous, and he never got any profit out of it. And it was actually financially troubling for him. This was in the 1850s, before the big, I think it was in the 1850s. It may have been before the evolution part came out. But then in his later years, he was an anti-vaxxer. That in tip 1.5 too. There was a certain reason why that's not as wacky than it is now, because the health standards that were being applied and the coercion that was being involved in some of the downsides of vaccination procedures at that time were legitimate concerns. But he stuck to his guns on that for years and years and years, even as they moved beyond the early days of anti-vaccination. And it became kind of a tragic element in the later part of his life on that. And of course, he lived all the way till 1913. So he has kind of a quirky end game, and a lot of his odd views. Darwin would sort of take the attitude while he was still alive that he was saying, well, poor Wallace, I can't figure out how he got off onto that tangent.
All right.
Oh, did Hoban come up here? Yep, and always the most fun because he's an asshole. Hashtag Hoban. Yeah, something came on Hub and Hoban, but I missed on that. Then Muslims still use the argument, look at the trees. That pops up in creationism context too, or its equivalent. It's basically look at something terribly complex, gee whiz. I call that the gee whiz argument. It's easy to do. You can point at it and go, ain't that complex? Can you make a tree? Well, only God can make a tree. But the problem is if you look at all the background details of how trees develop and how other plant life develops and what genes are involved and all that, it starts looking evolutionary. So it's a subset of the natural theology argument. Risky proposition to go into, because the details eventually don't look very non-evolutionary. And it's no coincidence that people who try to play the natural theology game either have to do it at a very superficial level or get bogged down into a quicksand where they start getting very tired and have to stop.
I bet you know what I'm going to say now, RJ.
If nobody comes up with an interesting comment around in here,
What the hell?
then
And what are the odds
I
of
should
that?
bag it.
What are the odds of that? In our infinite wisdom, we seem to invite a bunch of smart people to come in and chat in public chat. What the hell's wrong with us?
Well, Fino's bringing up the Quran on that is really an important point, because we must never forget that there's more to the world of wackaloonery than just Christian creationists. That yes, there's the ones that I have noticed more, but it's because we live in a world where we tend to notice that. But in particularly the kind of Quranic creationism that's in Saudi Arabia, for example, is just as wingnutty as Kent Hovind. And ironically enough, in Iran's school system, they're still taught evolution. It's never been removed in all of the years of the society. They still teach normal run-of-the-mill stuff that was the way it was taught back in the Shah's day. And that's, you're going, whoa, interesting. But in Saudi Arabia, they have functionally silly, stupid creationist textbooks over in there. I think some of the cases is true of Qatar and some of those other areas, but Iran would be in the liberal branch of Islamic teaching, ironically enough. How long that may change, it's hard to say, but it's interesting that it's stayed entrenched as long as it has, because it's been 30, 40 years since the revolution on there, and they had more than an ample opportunity to get rid of evolution teaching in their biology departments if they'd really been obsessed about it, but apparently they're not. Go figure.
Indeed. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us. Have a good night. It was really great seeing y'all.
Yeah, you just better cut it off. And that's thing. So I hope everybody had a good time.
Me too.
Had fun blathering on, and I loved a lot of the questions and comments on there. And I hope we can get some video people in as well in future things, because I think that will just add to the range of the conversation. And then someday, actually have a creationist or two come on. We'll treat them politely, but we won't cut them slack if they keep on bringing rope for us to hang them with.
Absolutely. They will be given opportunity to support their positions, and it'll, like we were saying, not a debate, a conversation.
Yeah.
Well, switching up the format should make things interesting. All right. Well,
yes, assuming I still have power on it and GoFundMe.
Well, which reminds me, I don't know if I mentioned this. This kind of thing.
Boy, is this the Plug Jimmy's revenue stream show or not? But I can't say that I'm not in need of the stuff.
You're going to need a revenue stream.
I'm always immensely grateful to everybody who has stepped up and helped.
Yeah, you're going to need a revenue stream before we plug it. So, all right, and because of statements I have made, you know that no video occurring here occurs without credits. Ready. Here comes David. Whoa, David, you rock. Okay.
And I will mention verbally Eat Meal and Paul Williams, who are the Patreons. We don't have it up on the little screen there yet, but you have been Patreons, and therefore you are duly acknowledged and gratefully so as patrons of Evolution Hour.
Very good. All right. Night all. Thanks for coming. And these 3 hours blew by pretty damn quick. I'm rather pleased with how it turned out. All right.
Relativity theory in RJ land. 1 hour does not necessarily mean 60 minutes.
We were using Microsoft minutes. What? All right.
Yeah, there we go.
Good night, everybody. And there's no closing. There's no closing theme song because of the level of criticism I got for my choices.
Well, we want to get a good, we need to have an opening credit music, and then we need to have a closing credit music. So we can use two themes there. So that doubles the possibilities there. We could have the runner-up as the end credits and the other one as the primary one, provided we are not being have our asses sued off because of copyright infringement. So I will put it to you, scistrike, to make sure that we are on a firm legal footing even as we are using things that will be musically entertaining and uplifting and appropriate for our particular venue.
I will ensure that that, in fact, is the case. And I'm not 100% sure, but did you not just commit me to shipping out 2 prizes instead of 1? I think you did. You just
I don't know. You'll have to figure that out. You'll have to figure that out. But it does occur to me to the idea that we could use different music for the opening and the closing, and so that we wouldn't
Great.
necessarily have to commit to just one. We could
Great.
put the first
Okay.
one up, they get top billing, and then the second one, or whichever one seems to be the one that makes best sense to be something to be covering the, oh gosh, is he finally going to stop talking? Oh,
All right. Well, since RJ put it out there, there will be 2 Darwin fish awarded. One for an opening song. Feel free to submit for both. One for the opening song and one for the closing song for RJ's Evolution Hour. The email address will be in the description when YouTube is done chewing on the video. It's done processing.
yeah.
So email them all
Otherwise,
there
I
just
may
so I
be
have them.
forced. Otherwise, I may be forced to do German expressionist art songs, and I tell you, no one is going to want that.
All right, so no closing song. Good night, everybody. We're just gonna have banter as the stream fades. Good night. See you next time, everybody. Hopefully, we'll see you all Friday.